Welcome to Table Talk, the place for deep conversations in the Geekverse. And trust me, when we tear into a subject, we go deep. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. Each episode, I'll be talking with one or more creators, authors, illustrators, publishers, or other movers and shakers in games, TV, books, movies, or other areas of the Geekverse. Regular guests include Douglas A. Burton, the author of Faraway Bird, a multi-award-winning historical fiction novel of the Byzantine Empress Theodora. He's also the author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, an alternative story structure to the hero's journey that often occurs in stories with feminine heroes. That structural framework frequently comes up in our analysis of story. Brianna da Silva, she's the director and co-writer of The Cultists, a Lovecraftian comedy mockumentary-style web show here on YouTube. And the author of The City of Reckoning, an epic fantasy novel of political intrigue, the ethics of war, and young love. Cameron Pasha is a screenwriter, director, novelist, and was a writer and producer on the series Kings, a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman, and a co-producer and writer for Sleeper Cell. He's also written for the CW series Nikita and Roswell, New Mexico. He's been breaking news from inside Lucasfilm, Disney, and Hollywood. His analysis and commentary have become very popular on YouTube. We regularly meet to discuss and analyze stories, and when we do, we dive into graduate-level seminars on story structure and writing. Come on in and let's go deep. And when I say we're going deep, I mean you'd better bring your hard suit. Other guests have included Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels Once Upon a Unicorn, the creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and the author of Star Wars, A Pirate's Price, the book that explains why the Millennium Falcon is on the planet Batu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Mark Tassin, the creator of the World of Ataltis, head of Mechanical Muse, former director of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. Let's see, who else?
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. Not yet. Maybe soon, though. But I have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games, crowdfunder extraordinaire, and publisher of many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. Brian Colin, sculptor of the world of Revelo Monster Busts, and the creator of the vast grim dark horror RPG. Ajit George, the Dungeons & Dragons author. We talked about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft, and the development of the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel.
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, the commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne, and the goddess of death.
Well, actually, that interview got rather spicy, so I think I'd better just keep that one to myself. Kate Wilson, a YouTuber, actress, host, and prolific geek guru who's now working to make a new show dedicated to the world of tabletop gaming a reality. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride, because it's time to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of geekdom through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Hello! Hey, good evening, everybody. It is so good to see you. I am very glad to have you here. It is Tuesday night. Welcome to my home. Welcome to the office. Welcome to Table Talk. It is time for classic science fiction in terms of novel writing, as well as modern science fiction as far as movies that are coming out today. So we are talking about Dune, and with us tonight are Douglas A. Burton and Brianna da Silva. Welcome to you both.
What's happening, everybody?
Good to see you. Good to see you. I feel like it's been a while, but we are
I know.
here.
I was saying it's like we took 1 week off and it feels like a month. You know?
Well, Brianna, do you want to introduce yourself?
If I have to, just kidding. Yes, I'm Brianna, also Brie, whichever one you want to call me. I am a fantasy author and a writer-director. My first novel, City of Reckoning, is available online, and it is about a bunch of teenagers that get caught up in a war and then begin to wonder if they're fighting for the wrong side. And I'm also working, doing script consulting with Cameron, who you guys will see on here sometimes, as I'm working on my portfolio for Hollywood. So that is mainly where my focus has been lately.
All right. Oh yeah, I meant to put the link in here. So this is the City of Reckoning.
And we are going to discuss this book soon. I
It
noticed
will be analyzed. Yes.
yes, I noticed that some people have been buying it recently. I was like, this must be from Tabletop, because I am not doing any advertising on this at all. So
we are going to cover City of Reckoning. I need to look at our schedule again as far as stuff is coming up. I think we were taking a look at Doug's got it right there. I know Paradise Lost is coming up. I was trying to go through Paradise Lost.
That'll be first.
And
Yes.
that's a beast. So
both beasts.
well, so is City of Reckoning. So So Dune, yeah, we've been going through books like once a month or whatever. So now it was Dune time. So I had been listening to all of Dune. I did the audiobook, and then I went through the movie again. And then I think it's Paradise Lost, but City of Reckoning is coming soon. So stay with us, everybody out there.
A lot of reading going on.
Lots of reading and stuff going on. All right, Doug. Here's your new website up showing off.
Hello, yeah, I'm Doug Burton, and I'm the author of Faraway Bird and The Heroine's Labyrinth. Yeah, the website has had a refresh. If you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see it says, "What is the Heroine's Labyrinth?" That button, if you click it, it takes you to, it's got the spiral in there. And if you keep going, it's got all the tarot cards. And if you hover over the tarot cards, it gives you a brief description. It's meant to be a useful summary without getting into depth. It's not meant to be comprehensive. For comprehensive, you have to buy the book. The Heroine's Labyrinth. Yeah, here's the first copy. We have been editing this thing and working on that. We have been working overtime on The Heroine's Labyrinth, and it was submitted to Amazon today. The whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle, the ISBN number, the whole thing's been uploaded like early, like 5 a.m. this morning, and it is still not posting on their site. It takes a while, and this one is taking a while. However, I noticed that when I start to type in The Heroine's Labyrinth, it auto-populates as an option in the drop-down. So, yeah, like if you write The Heroines...
Oh, maybe it's only doing it for you.
Oh, no.
Oh, maybe it's only doing it on my phone.
It did it for me a minute ago. It did it.
Yeah. Yeah, it did it on my phone.
Oh, I see it there. It was down there.
There it is.
There it is.
There's a choice. It's just not there yet. It's just not there yet.
Not there yet. Yeah.
James
So it shows up.
I knew everybody would want to know, but so it's not quite there yet, but it's very close.
It's thinking about it.
Go back to his website for a second. I want to point something out. Do you see where it says Vista's ally?
Yeah.
That looks like a spitting image of one of the characters in City of Reckoning and her pet wolf.
Really?
Totally is.
You'll know.
Brianna, maybe I channeled it.
No, I just archetypically created that or whatever.
What's her name in your book?
That archetype. It looks, she looks very similar.
What's her name in your book?
What'd you say?
What is her name in your book?
Oh, you'll meet her very early. You'll know when you've met her.
Oh, well, I'll just ask it, because I'll just tell people that's who it is.
It's Lucia. Her name is Lucia.
Lucia?
Lucia with an A.
Lucia. Like that is Lucia from the classic City of Reckoning.
With her loyal companion, Akiro.
Akiro.
Which is some people's favorite character, the wolf.
Oh, cool.
These images look fantastic.
They look gorgeous.
Yeah, they came out great. Yeah, I did, just something, a resource for people to see, because what I had on the website was very dated, very early, archaic model, and it had like, I think 10 other categories. Like it was all over the place, and people were looking at it and being like, I don't understand this, and I was like, because it's not it. That's not it. Ignore the website. So, but now
that's great.
It's ready to go. So we're getting close. Right. Yeah, the launch date is still March 26th. So we're getting excited for that. And pre-orders should be any minute now, either tonight, which I was hoping it would be available tonight, but soon, if not.
I know people were looking forward to that. We've got lots of clips of all the discussion that we've had about the Heroine's Labyrinth ready to go. So so you'll know if you're following this channel here, we'll get some soon. So soon clips will be going out as soon as the link is active. As soon as the link is active, Doug and I are going to sit down and we're going to schedule a bunch of things like that. So you'll see Heroine's Labyrinth clips, like 6 to 8 minute clips. So even if you haven't been following everything we've been talking about with the Heroine's Labyrinth over our 3, 4, 5, 10-hour conversations, they'll be clipped, they'll be here on the channel, and then down at the bottom there'll be a link. So you'll know once we have the link, stuff will be published here. So
and I've been
hard at work on thumbnails for them too. So
Brianna has been hard at work on thumbnails.
Yes,
I've seen them and they're awesome.
Oh, thank you. Good. I'm glad to hear. It's Heath's basic. He's got the style for the channel, and I've just been keeping with it. But yeah.
Awesome. It looks fantastic.
All right. But so for the moment, we did Faraway Bird. So Doug has done Faraway Bird, and so we've been over that on this channel as well. We did that book. That was one of the books we went over. So
don't forget to leave a rating or review. Those are so helpful to the books. So if you haven't yet, leave a rating and or a review. It's up to you.
Same for my book. Yeah.
And for City of Reckoning.
I always forget to tell people to do that.
Yeah, if you know it's going to be a 5-star read, you might as well just leave the rating now.
Or 4 stars. Sometimes 4 stars make it look good too, because if everything's a 5-star, then it's like,
yeah, it looks like Only the Friends or something.
Right? Exactly. Having a little criticism is also good. It makes us look more legitimate.
All right, and then also please come over here and check out the Cultist YouTube channel if you have not already. That's the show about modern day Lovecraftian cultists just trying to worship Cthulhu in a world full of people who don't understand. Brianna directed it and co-wrote it. I co-wrote it with her and created it. So please come over here and check that out. The Cultists on YouTube.
And don't forget your Cultists merch.
Nice.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yes. And those are available on ravenkeep.net. I don't have one within reach, but Doug did. Okay. All right. Well, I will take that down because now tonight we are talking about Dune. So this was a big one to get ready for because, of course, there was the movie, and I wanted to read the book before I went to see the movie, but I didn't get a chance to do that. But I knew that a lot of people who get into Dune really love Dune, and one of the reasons that I had been hesitant to get into Dune was because I thought it's probably something I'm really going to like in the level of Lord of the Rings and all of this. And I know that the people who are really into Dune really love it a lot. And I had just been hesitant to like jump into this and like having another thing like that on my plate, that, that level of something that I would, potentially care that much about. But I didn't get to read it before the movie came out. But when the movie came out, I did go and see it anyway. No, actually, I didn't go and see it. I missed it in the theater, and I'd watched it out of the theater. But nonetheless, when the movie came out, I watched it. And it was because a lot of the people who I knew who really did like Dune recommended that I see it. Mm-hmm. So that was, because like a lot of the time today, if you're a fan of a franchise or movie and then the movie comes out, like, oh, don't watch that. That has nothing to do with that.
They ruined it. Yeah.
So it seemed like from not a scientific study and panel, but just from people who I personally knew who enjoyed Dune had told me, yeah, go and see this movie and you'll understand what Dune is about. So I did, and I enjoyed it. And then I listened to the audiobook in preparation for this discussion and rewatched the movie a couple of times.
Yeah, I similar to Heath, I had not read Dune my whole life. Probably for similar reasons. It's a little daunting. Even on social media, you'll see the Dune fans. There's like 15 books, and you're like, oof, I'm not even touching that. It's like once you touch it, you got to go through the whole thing or something.
Not necessarily, but yes.
No, exactly.
I heard
it's like
first 3 are great. That's what I hear people say. You don't have to read anymore.
So I have read the first 3. The first one is the best. Second one, good. Third one, it starts to get weird. And I heard it gets even weirder, and then it suddenly recovers to become phenomenal. So
okay.
I haven't gone all the way to the depths of ultimate Frank Herbert weird, but I'm on the precipice. I'm ready to jump in.
Nice.
But until the movie came out, I had not touched Dune. I did not know the story of Dune. Just probably like you, Heath, just picked up bits and pieces. It's on a desert and all. There's a Messiah figure and all this other stuff. So I saw the movie and was absolutely captivated by the cinematography in Dune Part 1. It is excellent. I was enamored with Lady Jessica. I thought she was such a visually compelling character. I loved Duke Leto Atreides as played by Oscar Isaac. So I was sucked into the movie. So I was like, I have to read the book. So I sat down and I in my favorite reading chair, and I read this book and I loved it. And then Heath, recently for the cast, I had re-listened to it for the first time on audio, narrated by Scott Brick, who's great. And it's almost dramatized, and it is phenomenal.
I tried to read Dune years ago because I knew it was a classic. Same thing, it was the people call it the Lord of the Rings of science fiction in terms of its influence. I think that's not the perfect comparison because Lord of the Rings sort of launched a subgenre, whereas Dune didn't exactly do that, but it's super influential. But I couldn't when I first sat down to read it. I was bored. I was having a hard time getting into it. And also I for the longest time, I just had a big thing against chosen one narratives. I'm just it just turns me off immediately. I'm just I've heard that a million times. So I was not interested. So I kind of put it aside. I literally only read the first couple chapters and I was just not, I couldn't make myself read it. But then of course I saw the film, and as we'll get into more when we talk about the film, I'm a huge fan of how that film was made. I put that on my list when I talk about movies that exemplify the kinds of cinematography, the filmmaking styles that I would love to emulate one day. That's on my list. I would hand this to a whole bunch of departments. Actually, I was going to say DP, but a lot of people. And so, but I still wasn't really interested in the book until I was talking with Cameron about so I have an interest, of course, as we've talked about it before on the channel, in corruption arcs. Heath does as well, and that's just there's this very specific type of story I've been craving for a long time, and I kept looking for it and I couldn't find it. Just where I wanted an archetypal hero to turn into an archetypal villain. And he said, "Oh, you should tell people that your story is a female Dune." I was like, "Come again?" Excuse me, say that again. And he was like, "Yeah." He was like, "That kind of a thing happens in Dune." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Well, so then it became really important that I read it. So I listened to it on an audiobook. I'd heard multiple people say this audiobook production is really good, and it helped. I can be kind of a bit of a restless person sometimes. Sometimes it's if a story is too slow moving, I have a hard time, sitting still with it. But listening to it on audiobook was perfect. Those kinds of books, I do a great job listening to them. And I enjoyed it. I would say I would call myself a fan, I would say, of Dune. I think I'm not the exact core audience because there are still some things that don't quite resonate with me, but I'm very close. If you have a target, I'm not the center, but I'm the next rung. So I enjoyed it a lot, and the movie in particular.
You're the blue circle around the bullseye.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So in general, my kind of attitude and approach in looking both at the movie, and I'm especially excited for part 2, because whether or not this satisfies that particular craving I had, we're gonna have to save for next week, because that has to do with the second half of the book, in terms of the corruption arc stuff. But I've come to it with this sort of a humility aspect where, clearly this works. Clearly this is a super influential, super well-loved franchise, book and franchise that has been, people have continued to love for decades. And so my overall kind of outlook in studying it and reading it has been to understand why, to understand what are the things that resonate. I have a couple things that didn't work for me, but I think generally I considered it to be very good science fiction. And the movie in particular is just, I'll get into all sorts of things that I love about it.
Beautiful movie.
Yeah, I had hours of interviews with all sorts of people that were involved in making it.
Yeah, I wanted to tell a little brief story about the background of Dune.
Okay.
Because everyone knows the 1984 film with Toto doing the soundtrack.
Lynch?
It's kind
I
of.
did not see it. I've heard that it's.
I have
I've
not
heard bad things. In part. Well, see, this is hard to discuss just the first half of the story.
Just don't worry about that. Spoilers. We're in spoilers territory.
Okay. Because the element of the fact that this is supposed to be a cautionary tale, right? This is supposed to be a character who he's seen as a hero, but by the end he's not. And apparently a lot of people misunderstood that in Frank Herbert's intentions. That's why he wrote Dune Messiah, to kind of make that clear. what I hear is Lynch's film just makes him like a hero, but I haven't seen it yet. Are either of you able to confirm that?
It's half brilliant, half bizarre. So it is harder to watch. I did try to rewatch it recently, maybe about a year ago, actually. And I tried to rewatch it. And after having seen the modern Dune, this one definitely, I mean, it's already dated. I think it was made in 1984. There's some great stuff. It's got a great soundtrack. Toto, the band, the big 80s band, did the soundtrack for it. And they did great. It's a great soundtrack. So there's some things about the 1984 Lynch film that are really excellent, and then some things that are really tough and don't quite work. Just budget restraints and all that, because it's a wildly imaginative universe, Dune. Yeah. So they could only get so far. But what was interesting is Heath and I were actually scheduled to go on last week to talk about Alien. And it got canceled, but I had done a ton of research on it.
We're still doing that. We're still going to do Alien in a couple of more weeks.
I figure we'll make up for it. But what's interesting is there's this bizarre Dune crossover. So Dan O'Bannon, who's the guy who wrote the script for Alien, was in kind of these doldrums in Hollywood, and he was invited to come out to Paris to work with Alejandro Jodorowsky to do Dune. So Alejandro, there was going to be this big Dune project. They bought the rights from Frank Herbert, and there was this big Dune project in the 70s by Alejandro Jodorowsky. So, and he had Mick Jagger picked to be in the film. Salvador Dali was supposed to play one of the roles. It was a bizarre cast. It probably would have been an amazing classic. And while they were there, Alejandro Jodorowsky hired an artist named H.R. Geiger to design Arrakis. And while there, Dan O'Bannon met H.R. Geiger while working on this, what turned out to be a thwarted Dune project in France, because they were burning through cash, they were smoking weed, they were partying their asses off, and the producers are like, all right, we're canceling this project. You guys went through $2 million, and all you guys are doing is hanging out in France. So it got canceled. But Dan O'Bannon ended up keeping in touch with H.R. Geiger, and they designed the Alien together shortly after it. But it's weird because there is this bizarro Dune project that sounds amazing. Can you imagine H.R. Geiger working on the planets? Of Arrakis? Yeah, or Geddes Prime. Like, it would have been an unbelievable, with Mick Jagger playing Baron Harkonnen and Salvador Dali, the artist, playing Duke Leto Atreides. Like, this would have been an amazing movie, but it never happened. So anyway, it's just an interesting accidental crossover from my research from last week into this week. And I think little known. I don't think a lot of people knew that. I certainly didn't.
BGD was backing up your wait, I'm not sure why this take that on the weirdness of the
owing to studio
up here. Yeah, that the book series and what happens, Doug.
It gets really weird. It becomes almost abstract and harder to follow. But I heard that the series makes a dramatic recovery into epicness again, so I'm willing to stick with it.
Oh, it's worth reading or listening to all of them.
That's what I've heard. Right.
They have the same style of production for all the audiobooks. I checked all the the 7. I say all. There's other series that his son has written, but like in terms of
Brian, yeah. Awesome. Yeah, Dune is an epic world, and it is fascinating. And I think that the images and feelings of Arrakis, this desert planet, there's something about it that's captivating to the human imagination. Just the second you start thinking about it, with this like cinnamon scented spice covering the I mean, there's something there, and
I've got notes on the archetypes we'll come back to that. I've got
I bet you got great comments on that.
What was that comment that we were looking at, Heath? I want to make sure we didn't miss it.
Oh, well, no, I believe it was this one. No, this one.
Yes,
BGD says Lynch stops the story on a heroic high, mostly owing to studio pressure, whereas the cautionary notes are still very sublimated.
Okay.
Yeah. He doesn't follow through on, we don't get to see what happens to Paul, basically. Whereas it looks like Denis Villeneuve's vision is much more in tune with the book. And there was several notes of warning with Paul Atreides in the film that I appreciate. And it looks like that's going to be even more so in Dune Part 2.
I have a prediction for Dune Part 2. I have I haven't read Dune Messiah, so it's going to be hard for me to know whether or not my prediction has come true when I first watch it. But I have a prediction that we're going to go forward a little bit. We're going to do the opposite. I think he's going to show a little bit from Dune Messiah, because I know that's one of I have looked up how you pronounce his name, and I can say it. It's Denis Villeneuve. Denis Villeneuve.
Denis Villeneuve.
Denis Villeneuve. A little bit of an
Villeneuve. So there is an L sound.
Mm-hmm.
Denis Villeneuve. Okay,
Yep,
thank
yep.
you. I actually
And
appreciate
the way
that.
I know is because someone asked him, they said it that way, and they were like, "Did I say it correctly?" And he was like, "Nobody in the United States can say it except for you." And that was beautiful. But anyway,
awesome.
He's talked about how that was a misunderstanding, right? And so he really wanted to make sure that he was being true to Frank Herbert's original intention there. So so they're going to be pushing that a little bit further, I think, in Part 2 than the second half of the book did, but in a way that's, honoring what the author intended. So.
Well, and I heard that Denis plans to stop at Dune Part 3. So he says there's going to be one more movie and that's going to be it. So it'll probably be the tragic finale of Dune in terms of the whole story arc.
Right. And that may not even happen itself. That he's like, he'll only do it if he feels he can create the screenplay that's good enough. I think he's still working on it. So.
Well, I think after it sounds like just to be upfront, all the early reports for Dune Part 2 are phenomenal. I can't tell you the last time everyone's coming up with 2 thumbs up on a movie after seeing early screenings. It's very rare. There's a lot of anticipation for the film and the kind of things people are saying early on in terms of the visual spectacularness, the brilliance of the movie, the faster pace. Basically, it sounds like a slam dunk. Like he really pulled up. There's going to be tremendous minutia to go into Dune Part 3. So I think you can count on.
Probably right. Yeah.
My prediction is there will be Dune Part 3.
Yeah, he might be, as the artist, he'll be like, "I don't know if it's," and then the studios are like, "You will make it to finish that screenplay."
Dune Part 3.
Yes.
And he seems like the perfect guy to do this. He is well qualified. I was reading up on the book there, and he has a great instinct for putting the right people in place and knowing when to kind of nudge and when to leave people alone. And that's a tough skill with artists.
Yeah. Oh man, I want to talk. This was one of the things I wanted to mention today, and we're kind of bouncing around, but that's fine.
We are bouncing. We hadn't actually.
We haven't officially started the conversation.
More like, this is like background.
This was something that I wanted to talk about that was framing, at least for the movie, so it doesn't matter. But anyway, because there were some insights that I had with Denis that I think would be useful for other artists that are watching. Because I had an artist moment, a moment of learning. So I would put Denis Villeneuve. I think I might say he's my favorite director. He's certainly way up there in terms of directors that are working right now that I really admire. And so I had this feeling where when I think it was after I finished Part 1, well, a feeling that probably a lot of us can relate to, where I was really inspired. Oh, I should back up a little bit. It was I remember now, this was when I saw the trailer for Part 2. I was texting Doug and Heath about this. Like it's really rare that I watch something and I get that excited about watching the movie. And it really just spoke to the sort of core emotion that I have that makes me want to write stories. And it's very rare that a story gives me that feeling again. Like I've had that feeling, when I was a kid or whatever, and it just like
the zing.
Yeah, it's the sense of awe. It's also my draw towards epic stories in particular. Like when you're a little kid, it's so easy to feel small and to feel kind of in awe of things that are greater than you. And I think I'm always like wanting to feel that again. It's almost like a religious feeling, very reverent. I'm glad Cameron isn't here because he's going to be like, "Oh, even the atheists." Just shut up. but it's just I struggle for the right words for it. It's this very strong emotion that is part of why I like epic stories. And that trailer, the trailer for Part 2 was giving me that feeling. But I was also just like, feeling, all inspired with all the Dune stuff. And then in that spirit, I go and I open up the draft, like one of my, the project I'm working on right now, like one of my epic currently in progress. And I just feel that like the contrast and that gap of like when you see something that is just the epitome of skill that you want, and you still feel yourself being like way down here and not there again. And it's just like this gut-wrenching feeling. I know everyone knows what that feeling is. And I was like, oh man, it's gonna be so long, before I can like create something like that. And then I was like, hold on a second, Brianna. Let's look at Denis Villeneuve, this guy that you admire. You're like, I really wish I could be like, have the sort of knowledge and wisdom and the excellence of craft that this man has. Let's look at his history. So I go over to imdb.com and I look, okay, what is his first movie he ever made? His first credit is in 1994. So he's been doing stuff for as long as I've been alive, roughly. Wow. He's been directing. What is his first credits? It's like short films, music videos. And then he does like a whole bunch of these really small, low budget feature films that are all, according to ratings on IMDb, not that great. Like they're just kind of okay. He makes a bunch of okay character-driven stories. He does that for 20 years. 20 years, you see, it's just all this like low budget stuff that's like okay. Before his career really starts, I would say it was with Prisoners. That's like one of his first. You can see that it's a higher budget, more of like a studio film, which was kind of like a centered on a family. It's like a dark, intense thriller. Haven't watched it yet because I'm scared to. And that led him to making Sicario. Also before that, he did like a low budget thriller, which I think allowed that to happen. Then he did Sicario. And then after Sicario comes his very first science fiction credit, Arrival. That was another big step. Arrival, by the way, if anyone has not seen Arrival, fantastic movie. Definitely watch it. That was how I first started becoming a fan of him as a director. So when I saw that movie.
He did Arrival?
Yeah, he did Arrival. And then Arrival allowed him to make this huge leap, right? And now he's working in an established franchise, and he does, what's that movie called? Blade Runner 2049.
Blade Runner 2049.
In which he works with Roger Deakins, who is like the master cinematographer alive today. Just creme de la creme. And it's only after that, after 30 years of experience, that he then gets to do his childhood dream to make Dune. And that I feel like is a really good reminder.
Takes a while.
It takes a while. And it's like, where am I in my current status? I'm over here at the making little indie short film status, I'm there. So that might be 30 years away, right? And that's okay. Like it takes excellence of craft takes decades. It very much takes years. And I just think it's a really good reminder if to anyone who's just like feeling that like, that devastating, like, oh, I'm not where I want to be. Yeah, you just keep working and you keep getting the experience and you keep learning and growing. And that is how everyone does it. It's not like prodigies are rare. They're the exception to the rule, right? Most people don't just like pop out and make a masterpiece. It takes a lot of time. So,
yeah, and I think a lot of people began to recognize Denis with Blade Runner 2049. It was kind of a mixed bag with the critics at the time, but it's beginning to age well. I keep hearing people bring it up. It's almost like because Dune is now kind of a breakthrough sci-fi, people are going back to Blade Runner 2049 and being like, well, maybe there was more here than we thought. I remember it moving slow, and I remember it not being like what I hoped, but I remember being kind of blown away by the visual experience, the sounds. It did feel authentic to the world. Exactly what Michael just said. Yeah, it's the Blade Runner world. Denis brought it back. So I might even rewatch Blade Runner 2049 to reintroduce myself to him. But it seems like a lot of people are doing that, and that the excellence was there. And to Brianna's point, it starts with little bitty tremors and then turns into a giant sandworm later on in 20.
Right. And so much of how someone like being able to do something with that kind of excellence, it's because of all of this experience, just 3 decades of experience.
In fact, just to address Keith Crow's comment, from what I read, they were watching Dune. I'm sorry, they were watching Blade Runner 2049 at a film festival, and he made a comment. Someone, like, oh yeah, it'd be great to do Dune way back in like 2018, I think is the date, at a film festival, and that's when they're like, you want to what? And then this got the news passed around. I think there was even an article or two written about it. And they're like, do you want? And they said the people who came up with the idea of redoing Dune, they said there was only one director considered, and it was Denis Villeneuve. So his comment at that festival from Blade Runner 2049 did lead directly to Dune. And thank God. I think he's put sci-fi right back into the driver's seat here.
Yep.
All right. Well, with that opening commentary,
There's a lot of commentary.
That was good stuff. That's fun stuff.
do you want to start, Brianna?
Do I want to start? Do we want to?
I mean, I could open with my general comments, but do you want to tear into it?
You still have general comments that you want to make?
Well,
Or,
I mean,
up to you. I'm happy to.
I'm afraid that my opinion on this is going to be the outside opinion on
That's
this,
okay,
or the outlier on all of this, because I did think that I was very glad that I went through and I listened to the book, did the audiobook, but I was very glad that I did, and I was very glad that I did because of the book's position in culture, especially in science fiction. It is absolutely the case that as I was reading things, how many other things came out of this,
Right.
Yes.
that you see here first. And for that reason alone, I was very glad that I did go through and listen to the entire book in order to have this experience. But the first book didn't leave me with like a desire to go on and keep reading. Now, maybe if there's going to be a Dune Part 3, then read Dune Messiah or whatever. But by the time I got to the end of it, I was like, okay, I've experienced this. I didn't necessarily want to keep going.
You are not the target audience or the next rung, it seems.
It seemed not. It seemed like I have a lot of, I mean, I was writing notes. I mean, eventually I was like, okay, I'm going to have to like take some notes. And I think I was dictating notes into this notepad thing as I was listening and things like that, because so many of the notes that I critiqued had here had to do with things that, I guess, like I would have critiqued things before even Brianna and I started getting together for table talk. That's like, I don't understand the plot of this. Every time I'm thinking, oh, well, then they should clearly go and do this. They don't. And I don't understand why. And why aren't they doing this? And why isn't there anybody else who wants to know X or Y or something like that? And so to me, in many situations, there was like, especially like obviously the George R. Martin comparisons are huge. Like when I was reading this, I was like, oh my God. So yes, you definitely get the George R. Martin inspiration of a Game of Thrones out of Dune. And I was like, but it, to me, now George R. Martin critiques on its own aside, that I was like, oh yeah, George R. Martin looked at this and went, wow, I can do this better. And then I think, because people, I kept reading online, this is a really like political intrigue. This is a book about politics and the behind the scenes, and so when it set me down, I got to admit that as soon as I read or listened to the first 3 sentences, boom, I was hooked. I mean, this book had me in the beginning. Absolutely. I was like, oh my God, yes, I was right. Because once I start reading this, I'm going to be deep into this, because and it carried me that way for 30-40% of the book, that I was like, oh my God, this is really going to be something amazing. But to me, he didn't push it to the point where it should have gone. And that if you're talking about like the politics of the households, and all of the different great houses and things like that, I didn't see that in this book. And then that was like, oh yeah. So George R. Martin said, no, wait a minute. You want politics between great houses? Hang on. I'll give you politics between great houses. And went and did it dramatically better. Dune is the most sprawling political theater of all time from any genre. I don't know. So that's where I came from. I was completely
Sprawling being a key
when I
word
started
there.
this. I was
More so
completely
than
hooked.
political, I think.
I'm sorry, what'd you say,
I
Brianna?
said sprawling might be the key word there rather than political, because it's an epic. And I think, the politics are part of it, but that's not like the main focus of the story. I think it's more.
Well, it's also not action.
No.
It's not action.
Yeah,
it's not
a lot
action.
of action moments. I thought that was funny. I was like, oh, and then we're just gonna skip over this
Yeah,
stuff.
right.
Okay,
Oh yeah.
we'll find
Look,
it. We'll
here's
see
something
it.
exciting that's going to happen. We could totally have something exciting that's about to happen in this book. Oh, nope. We're not going to consider that. Nope, we're going to skip right over that. So it's not an action book. Then okay, there's going to be a lot of political intrigue, and I didn't get a whole lot of political intrigue either. So because for that, by the time we were getting into 50, 60, 70%, I was like, oh my God. Something needs to happen in this book. So I don't know. So that's my general analysis.
We're definitely very different kinds of readers. I have this running theory. I'd be curious to know what the two of you think about this. That I've had for a while. That there are basically two types of audience members, and they also, I think, translate into two types of writers, because it'll determine what your strength is. There's the kind, and I suspect, Heath, you and I are the opposite kinds. We'll see what you think. But there's the kind that is very. This is the kind that I think you are. I know I've got a few different friends that I've noticed that are of this variety, where it's very, very important that the logic of the world and of the plot makes sense, and if it isn't, that takes that person out of the story immediately. That just
functionality.
This is a kind of a more analytical way, I suppose, of experiencing the story, where it needs to make sense. That's the worst sin. That's a good way I could put it. The worst sin for this type of audience member is that if it doesn't make sense. And then I'm of this other kind, where the worst sin is if I don't feel anything. I don't like where this kind of what we want most is, or viewer is, to have an emotional experience. We want characters that we care about. And there needs to be, I need to be brought on this emotional experience. And the only way that something like my kind of a viewer, the only time we ever think or care about like the plot even at all, is if it makes so much, it's like so glaringly nonsensical that it gets in the way of the emotions. For the most part, I don't even pay attention to that kind of stuff. It's just like a vehicle for experiencing the story. But then that's depending which type of you are, that will become your weakness as a writer. So for me, plot is my weakness. I have to work extra hard on that because I'm much more keen on characters and on the emotional experience and things like that. And so that's partly what I enjoyed about Dune, was the characters that I was interacting with. And that was partly why Dune Part 1 wasn't perfect for me the first time I watched it, because I still felt like the characters were a little too dry for me. But after reading the book, I kind of understood their depth a little bit more, and I was a lot more intrigued. And the journey the protagonist is going through was what it intrigued me, and the cultural differences and all that stuff. It's still like very.
You got emotional connection to the characters through the book.
Yeah, especially Paul and his mother. They were interesting. Now I didn't have as much.
I would say his mother was the most interesting.
I wasn't as.
I love Lady Jessica. Yeah,
I didn't experience as much closeness to them as I would prefer. If it was my favorite, if I was the core, when I really, really love a book, it's because of that. It's because I feel very close to the characters. I didn't feel close to them, but they were interesting. I was very interested to see what they would do. But what do you guys think about that? Do you think does that resonate?
See, I did have an emotional connection, but it wasn't like I was crying or they weren't profound but I felt vested in the characters, and I found Paul interesting. There were several references to him, constantly referencing how he would ask very intuitive questions, or he was a little ahead of the game, or he seemed to know these things. And then this theme of Paul being very ahead of the curve was just reinforced thematically with the Bene Gesserit prophecy that they had set up on Arrakis, which it seemed to be like a fake story, but here it's kind of real. And so I thought that worked very well. I felt the strong paternal bond with Leto Atreides. He seemed like the good leader in some sense. The scene where he was in the Omnithopter and he decided to save the crew instead of the spice.
Very honorable character.
Underscored this man's nobility.
I love that. I love that character development.
Right.
Which contrasts a little bit with how Paul is later, but I have to.
Well, true. But what I'm saying is for the first half of this book, there were many things that I found compelling. So even though it may not have been profound emotional feelings, I was absolutely vested. I felt compelled to follow these characters. And I think I did feel that this was political. So the way I felt, so I saw the movie first, so I knew about the ultimate betrayal. In fact, you said that this book spawned things like George R.R. Martin's, political intrigue of competing houses, where you said, and you're probably right, George R.R. Martin did a better job in that he fleshed these out. Like this was very. However, when I was reading Dune,
he has a different focus. His stories is focusing on different. Right?
Yes, yeah, but I don't fault Dune in that comparison necessarily. Dune also spawned George Lucas. This was Tatooine and the Krayt dragons
and the Empire, the Emperor.
Yes, exactly. So
yeah,
and George Lucas is very open about the fact that Dune influenced a lot of his images. Dune came out in I think 1967, and Lucas was he did his early work on like American Graffiti in 73, and then obviously so these guys were overlapped each other.
And they were kind of taking different elements too, like different things that they liked that they then went and focused on more. And
yes,
yeah.
Well, and so as far as the political intrigue, what I found that Dune did amazing, and I think this is why this has stuck around as a political thriller. Even though I think Heath's got a good point that this wasn't as in depth and defined, it seemed to be a little bit more pulled back. What I think worked is that the book sets you up for chapter after chapter after chapter as if you're playing chess. And imagine if there's a chessboard and the Harkonnen pieces come off the chessboard and the Atreides pieces goes on the chessboard, but there's like a hidden or two hidden Harkonnen pieces moving around on the board. And so you're looking for these two little pieces. You're trying to, and then suddenly, boom, a genocidal event to wipe out all of House of Atreides. That's a hell of a plot line. This it's almost, I think I've even theorized that Lucas got the idea of Order 66 from Dune because of the it sets you up for this like cloak and dagger in the shadows, stabbing, political intrigue, and what it is.
You're looking for the wrong thing.
Right, you're looking for that little hidden pawn on the board somewhere, and what you're going to get is a nuclear bomb, a genocidal event for House Atreides. It's so catastrophic, and it sets you up by misleading you through some of the political thrill that when you realize that the Emperor and House Harkonnen set up this family. So now when I read it, like this, when I was reading it over the last week, every chapter is a tragedy because they're totally underestimating the power of the plot that they're up against. And it's funny because I was even reading it. I'm like, I don't think I've ever read a book where they're telling you that there's a plot coming. They're like, oh yeah, they're signaling each other with lights out there. The Harkonnens are up to something. And I'm like, guys. So they're all over the plot. They just completely underestimated the degree and the magnitude of this plot. And I think that
the Empire itself was going to be in cahoots with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they paint, I can't wait for Christopher Walken's portrayal of the Padishah Emperor because they describe him as such almost like a Roman child, psychotic emperor, of jealousy and all the base emotions and with ultimate power. So to me, that's what I think worked about the political intrigue with Dune is this overarching plot that everyone missed, including the reader the first time through. And the author was able to drop that nuclear bomb on this family that you grew to like. And it just throws all the pieces into chaos. Anyway, that was just my brief analysis of why I thought the political side worked, even if it was thin to Heath's point, because there are, from comparing them to George R.R. Martin, Dune would seem very thin.
It's very thin.
Yeah, but I don't think that's the intention. It's also, at least what I found interesting about the politics was that it wasn't looking at so much of this, this big overarching picture. There was some of that. Most of the politics, the political intrigue happened on a very small, intimate scale. It was the tiny little pieces of how these characters worded things, you know, and how they, you know, these little, they're like interacting with each other in these very subtle ways that I thought was interesting. It also sounded exhausting. It made me not want to ever be in politics. It's like, can you imagine having to like measure so like carefully how you're like your posture and like how the exact tone of voice you use? Like, God, it's disgusting. I hate that stuff. But it's interesting hearing these people kind of strategize in real time as they're building, you know, alliances and trying to figure out who's betraying them and all this kind of stuff.
I might not have brought that up, except for a lot of the times when after I read the book, then I went and said, let me go, and I watched about 20 hours worth of analysis on YouTube and and then read a bunch of Reddit material as well. Like, what are people saying about that after and I wouldn't have necessarily said all that, but so many people are like, whoa, this is the master politic book of the galaxy. And it's not an action, it's the politics. And so many people, it seemed like, talked about that in their analysis, and I just did not see it. Otherwise, I probably would have skipped it, because then I would have been said, oh, look, he planted some seeds here and he had some great ideas that you could do some politics about great houses of a feudal empire. And George R. R. Martin was like, yeah, I could totally do that. But so that's why I picked up on it, was because so many other people were saying that, hey, this is what this is about.
But I would also add that he did enough politics to make the story work, and not
right.
and not anymore.
More would have been too much for me, but that's also maybe a taste thing. I don't know.
Well, but he also, true. It could have actually turned some people off if he got too political, too intriguing, too Byzantine. I've been waiting to use
Byzantine.
If he got too much into that, it might have actually detracted. It's possible.
But maybe not for a reader like Heath. Maybe Heath would have liked it more if it had more of that.
Well, but that's the beauty.
A lot does come down to taste, doesn't it?
Yeah, you get a wide range of different responses to the same material, but there are political intrigues in terms of the relationship of this high society with all of these resources with a local indigenous group like the Fremen, right? There's a lot of discussion on how that would work and how to establish proper relations. So there's accidental commentary there, and that's the best commentary. That's the time I could take anything in a book. When it just happens because that's the situation and these are the characters, and they're not trying to vilify one group or anything like that. But I thought it was excellent. The Harkonnens were a little bit more authoritarian and heavy-handed and militaristic. And House Atreides, you get the sense that they were severe but compassionate. And then the Fremen, you get a sense of that nobility and survivalism. And in the setting of Arrakis, there's something
tradition too. Tradition super important for the Fremen. Yeah.
Yes. Well, yes. But in the setting, it just lodges itself, at least for me, into my subconscious. Like it's like I was able to enter a dream, and now I can't quite forget the dream. It was such a good story.
Touches a lot of archetypes.
A lot.
Right. Well, what I was saying within retrospect, it may seem minor league in politics, but no other side. That's why I was saying that I was glad that I had read it, because it's the beginning of it. Right. When you're looking at this as the beginning of an idea that you might be able to do a lot of politics in a book, maybe it's not in this book, but it planted the seeds for other people to go, oh, now wait a minute. This is something really expanded. So I know I completely
think
agree.
About like the politics and world building of The Hobbit versus Lord of the Rings. When you've never seen it before, this is very high level. And then other creatives like a George R. R. Martin or a George Lucas or whoever else gets to build on that. They're like, I want to do what, like Frank Herbert upped the ante in what he was able to do with science fiction. And then other people are like, I'm going to try to do what Herbert did and figure out another angle on it. Yeah. And that's the process. And I love that when new creators come in and add to it.
That's why I was glad that I read the original. I was surprised at the number of people who thought, and we should talk about this, I suppose, before we actually start getting into it.
We are getting into it.
I know. I just like saying that because this is that I was surprised the number of people who said they could not read it because it was written in an ancient style, an ancient style
from some decades ago.
Yeah, that they didn't understand it because it is written in a style that is almost never used today. It's written in an omniscient style where you can hear the thoughts of multiple characters in a single scene. That doesn't bother me at all. Right. As I'm reading it, it doesn't bother me at all, and I was completely capable of understanding the story. Yes, I understand that in today's world, you don't write in third-person omniscient
unless it works.
I don't think you don't. I think it's just way less popular. I think it's just
way less popular.
It still happens though.
So it seemed, as I was reading, it was very much surprised some people who were very much like, after having read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, reading something in third person omniscient, like I said, I wouldn't even picked up on it. It's just, that's the way the story is written. But some people were like, I don't understand. Can the main character read minds?
That's funny. That means someone has never read.
People who have never encountered a story that's written in third person omniscient.
That's so weird.
It seemed like I was reading some instances where people were having trouble with that, and I was cognizant of that as I was going through, especially having gone through like Drake's a treatise over here, his book specifically on points of views in books and things like that, and that this is written in a style that is very much unpopular now.
Yeah.
Well, it's unpopular because a couple things. I don't think a lot of writers are good at it. I mean, if you've tried it, and I have, it gets real difficult real quick because you have to, I mean, even just from a grammar, you're always starting new paragraphs and you switch points of view, and you can lose track of it real quick. And if there's no center, sometimes it feels like it's floating. Whereas I did not sense that while reading Dune. I felt very anchored. I felt like it effortlessly jumped from each point of view. And I would just challenge writers to try it because it is super hard. And
it made me want to try it.
Well, I guarantee if you worked at it, you'll get really good at it. But you'd have to be willing, I think, to go through a learning curve. But to be perfectly fair, any point of view is challenging. The second you choose it and you're like, this is what I'm going to do, third person limited. Well, now you're stuck.
Now you're limited in what you can write.
So each approach to story has its own challenges. I thought that this sort of omniscient point of view did work rather well because there were things about this world that we don't understand as a reader until he just tells you, like the idea of the Bene Gesserit setting up centuries of plans, like that's new, like
millennia.
When you hear a character's like, remember our plans are in terms of centuries, you're like,
how does that even work? Yeah.
Damn, these people are dangerous. Wow. That they set up prophecies, like all
that was so fascinating. Like you come to this world and there are these prophecies, and you're like, I'm fulfilling these prophecies, except these prophecies were created by the same people that created me. So it's all fake. It's all artificially created.
Yeah.
But then he goes and intentionally fulfills them for his own purposes. But
but they were crossing bloodlines, the Bene Gesserit, on purpose to create someone like Paul. And Lady Jessica did it preemptively, and she got, Mother Mohaim scolded her for that. She's like, you and your arrogance, to have a son instead of a daughter. How dare you? So she kind of went rogue there a little bit. And then the idea of a mentat, computers are outlawed. They don't get into it that much, but that's all you need to know. And now here's a guy who's trained, he's trained to do high level data computations on the spot. And, he's got a mentat, and Baron Harkonnen's got a mentat, and then Paul Atreides is conditioned to register somebody, and, all these little things. There's truth sense is another term. So I loved it. I felt like I was just along for the ride with these complex, heavy-handed training programs that these characters seem to undergo.
I was watching the movie again, the before this started, but I didn't get to rewatch the entire thing. But in the book, Paul is a mentat as well. But that wasn't brought up in the movies. Is that right, Doug? Is that what you remember? I was talking to Brianna about
I don't remember him being a mentat.
But he had some of the same training, but I don't think he was like.
Oh, he's
Yeah,
not.
Paul-
It led to him being able to have a completely different and bigger kind of power. But I think all that was kind of like influencing that and allowing him to.
Yeah, my understanding was that Paul has overlapping abilities from a lot of these different like schools of thought and training. Gurney Halleck trained him to be a warrior. His mother trained him to be a Bene Gesserit. I do think he had some mentat.
Okay, I'm looking it up right here because we have different things here because Bane's son says he is trained as a mentat.
Right.
But then Michael says, no, he was trained the ways of the Bene Gesserit. He was definitely trained the ways of the Bene Gesserit.
I think he was.
But in the book, he was taught as a mentat. The Dune Wiki says, shortly after his 15th birthday in the year 10191 AG, Paul's father revealed to him that his training through his teachers had been geared toward turning Paul into a mentat. Because I thought I remembered that scene.
Yeah, I remember.
The book as we were going on, that gives you, as a mentat, you don't know you're being trained as a mentat. But then at some point they reveal to you that you have been, and then you in retrospect realize that everything is so. Paul,
and then you can choose to continue the training too, because he said yes. So he may not have actually become a mentat, but he was being trained in that direction. He was being
So he also
he
has
doesn't use the Sapo
right
use.
Yeah, he hasn't officially done it, but he's not all the way. But he has some of those abilities.
So he's in the book. He's supposed to have everything. He's the Bene Gesserit. He's the mentat. He's all of these things that are rolled up. Yeah.
Yeah. On that note, the whole idea of this world, it's something that we're not used to seeing a lot in science fiction, where the interaction that they have with technology is fascinating to me, where they sort of reference, it's not something that's explained in detail. I think Frank Herbert's son wrote another series to explain this this backstory about this war that happened with the thinking machines, kind of a thing.
Yes.
Where at some point humanity, I guess it might have been almost like a
AI.
Yeah, AI. Why am I blanking on that?
Skynet.
The thing made in 1999, 2000. Why am I blanking on what that Matrix?
Internet.
World Wide Web. We're like, yeah, where people are becoming reliant on these machines. That sounds familiar. To the point where they couldn't really think as much on their own, and that ended up being something that humanity shifted away from. They're like, this is not good for us. And so they're using technology in different ways, like not, basically they sort of abandon their information revolution kind of a thing. It seems to be what the implication is, in order to return to embracing the fullness of human potential, which is a fascinating thing to look at in current day, because that's absolute. I mean, no, that's not even controversial to note that we're clearly reducing our own cognitive abilities on an individual basis and on a broader basis, because we're relying more on these machines that were, kind of that are extensions of us. We're all slightly cyborgs at the moment in modern society. And yeah, I could see how that's probably not good for us in the long run, but I don't know. I just thought that was such an intriguing thing to think about.
Well, and the way Frank Herbert sets it up is he doesn't have people set up with implants or abilities that the way he sets it up is like they've learned this.
Right, like
with serious discipline, that they're just like you and me in a way. They have massive training to condition their minds to do these things, and they have a little bit of help from substances. So like the sapo juice or like the spice. So there's assists, but it's mainly human discipline that gets them to these super high levels. So I felt like because he stayed there, it was easier to believe all these characters doing this, because it's like, oh, that's his conditioning. He's conditioned to do that. Just the wording of it throughout the book made it, for me, easy to believe that these characters were just in the future highly trained to do what would be superhuman feats. And it was an interesting take.
Yeah, and the thing is that a lot of people today forget the fact that like what we even think of as superhuman right now is very human. Like there's so many things that were normal for us in ancient times to do, especially if you go back all the way to hunter-gatherer times. There's so many skills that we're capable of biologically that we don't do anymore. Like, it wasn't like memorization is a big thing. Like we're capable of so much memorization, and we just don't have to memorize things that much anymore. But, people used to memorize an entire, think about something like the Iliad or the Odyssey. People would memorize that in its entirety and then be able to recite it. And it would take days. Like that's a thing that, like, there are still people today that do that in parts of the world.
Or the Torah or the Quran, people memorize.
Yeah. And, people can train themselves. You think about like, practices in like Buddhism, or for example, like really, really intense meditative states and stuff like that people still do stuff like that today. But there's you used to, in like a hunter-gatherer context, you would have just a massive amount of information that you would have to keep in your head to know, to understand how to track animals and like what specific, this specific mushroom under this tree at this time of the year is poisonous, but under these slightly different circumstances, it's helpful if you have a headache. Like humans just used to know all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it is an interesting thing. Part of how I know some of this was because when I was a kid, for a brief period of time, I was homeschooled, and my parents went through a brief fascination with classical conversations, which is a form of so-called classic education. I'm a little bit skeptical of it now, but part of it was trying to use the powers of memorization, especially for kids. So they would we memorized a whole bunch of stuff before you would like learn what it meant. And most of it didn't stay in my long-term memory, unfortunately, but some of it did. But,
yeah, memorization skills. When I worked at SeaWorld briefly, and at one point I had memorized, just because they were at every exhibit. I was in the education department, so I'd go from like different. I had memorized like 350 genus species.
Wow.
It got to be a funny thing. I was like, name an animal, and I know the genus species because they were just listed on all these things. And I had nothing better to do, so I was like, I'm just going to memorize all these. And over time, I had them all memorized. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were like teaching us, like for geography, it was like they were training us to be able to have a map, like a map of the world or the United States or whatever it was, and to be able to draw it all from memory. And
I memorized the world map. I could still draw the world map by memory.
I can't anymore.
Yeah,
that
sure
was what got me into
I
drawing maps, and that's what got me into making a fantasy world.
Yeah.
Mental mapping is definitely something people talk about in geography, and its meaning when people draw.
Yeah, I mean, even like where to put the Great Lakes inside the draw,
and what they look
rivers.
like, what they're the specifics, and whatever. But like that's something that the human brain can do, but most of us don't, because we can just look anything up that we want to know.
It was just part of my Mentat training.
Yeah, part of your Mentat training.
When I was a child. But what's interesting too is what the book includes that the movie does not.
Okay.
Did you guys make notes on that? On what was left out?
Oh yeah, I did. I made a bunch of notes.
All right, let's talk about that.
Because all of the ones that I saw, they seemed to be things that where I was behind it, where it seemed like I understood why the decision was made. And it was either to make it for a better movie. In some cases, I thought it was like better. I was like, the book should have done this.
Well, I agree, Brianna. I think, given the particular relationship that I had with this book, I did think that things, when they were removed, at like the dinner table scene,
that was like 2 lines. I was like, oh, the dinner table scene, 2 lines, and then they moved to a new location. I was
the movie chose to kind of like, let's go ahead and get on with this a little bit,
right.
And that, I think that was to the good. So in this case, I do think there were editorial decisions made, which is far from always the case, far from always the case, that he moved things along a bit in the movie to the good.
They actually condensed the dinner scene a little bit. Her using that like prepare for violence sign language in the movie, that was in the dinner scene. They used code words like the word garment. I love some of their setup in there. But that whole prepare for violence scene with the hand signals and stuff like that, they moved that in the movie to when Mapes gives her the Chris knife. She does that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The hand signal, prepare for violence. Mm-hmm. So that they did keep that part of it. They just condensed it with that Chris knife gift.
Also,
Yeah, real interesting how they use that.
And also they were using more, like in the book, if I recall correctly, it was more, there were more word, like they mentioned that they had like like hand signals, but there was a more like of the words that had other meanings. But then in the movie they emphasized the hand signals just because it's more visual.
Yes, I agree. In fact, yeah, they hardly, my early note was they removed sign language in the book. And then I realized, no, they had it. That's right, they had it. It just didn't come in until later. Whereas in the movie, she uses it right away, which I loved it. I love this idea that there's real just quick signals to like let everyone know. And that dinner table scene was pretty tense. There was a Harkonnen there, you know. So it was an interesting scene to cut because it did add a level of proximate danger rather than elusive danger that the rest of the book focused on. Like, you know, Harkonnens are somewhere, we just don't know where. And then in this one, you know, they're right there. You know, the wrong signal could trigger, you know, violence and all this other stuff. So I was cool with them cutting it, but it certainly was cool to read it.
That was a scene that only worked as a novel.
Baneson says the dining room was one of the most important scenes, and Michael J. Pastor is also saying you think cutting the most political scene in the book at dinner table is a good idea.
Yeah, because what did it add that you needed in the movie? You know what I mean? Like there was nothing there. Like it was all interesting to read, but it would have been harder to follow visually because, again, a lot of it is you have to kind of explain like what these interactions are and what they mean.
See, at this time, I was still seriously into the book and going, oh, man, this wasn't in the movie. Oh, at that time, when I was reading those scenes, and then also like the secret room that the mother's got that's got like all the plants and stuff in it. And
yes, I want to talk about that.
Oh, my God. All right. We are getting into some stuff here. But I don't know. But by the time I'm 60%, 70% of the way through the book, I'm like, I don't know what that actually has contributed to my understanding of what's going on. So if I only got an hour, 2 hours or a little bit longer in a movie, I think this is a bit longer a movie. Let's not spend 20 minutes of this movie at a dinner table.
No, and that's not,
move on.
If it was a TV show, then you could have kept it, but there's just no time for that.
I was trying to, so we need to be much more explicit about that. Because that's one of the things I want. Okay, so why exactly does the Emperor need to get rid of Duke Leto?
Well, he's jealous of him and his popularity. He was growing in popularity.
For the sake of a movie, that's all you need to know.
Did I ever see him he's this insanely popular guy. So I wrote later, doesn't the Duke have like an ally someplace that's going to be upset that this has happened to him? If he's this insanely popular guy,
that's why it's
so insanely popular that the Emperor's got to knock him off, you would think there would be like an ally.
But I'll tell you,
there were. That was implied. That was strongly implied. There were lots of allies, which is why it was so important that nobody knew that the Emperor was involved. That was the secret that could not.
Well, that was part of the secret. Plus,
that was going to be the risk that he was making.
Yeah, and I think if you witness or become aware that somebody was crushed like that, it certainly puts anyone else on deep. Like, gee, are we going to cross these guys or not? Are we going to go to war over this, or are we going to look what they just did to the House Atreides? Yeah,
because they were covering up most of what happened. They had alternative stories for.
You're right. You got to have the Imperial troops and the Harkonnen uniforms and all of that.
Well, a couple things.
All right.
Don't be surprised if there's not a comparable dinner scene in Dune Part 2. I'm curious to see if they try to make up for it.
I'm sure they will, because we haven't in Dune Part 1. That's another thing too, is that we haven't met the Emperor yet, and so a lot of those details aren't necessary for us to know yet, but they may be later. So I suspect that we probably, like you're saying, we'll probably get more of those politics. But it's also like you don't need all the details, in a movie.
I'll say this from a writing standpoint. There's two ways to look at this. Do I like that they cut the dinner scene? Actually, no. I actually would have liked to see the dinner scene because you're watching Atreides. You're looking at House Atreides and House Harkonnen communicating in some way. There's a lot of tension. This is an actual interaction between these rival houses. And I think it could have been a really good scene because instead of like this sort of elusive tension, you get actual interaction between these. However, from the directorial point of view, where you have to start trimming, maybe that's just the one they decided had to go out of all. Because Dune Part 1 still runs long. It's not a quick. It's not like it's like 2 hour movie. It goes over 2 hours.
No, I thought it was like 2.5.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot. It's over 2 hours.
Yeah. So, I think
2 hours,
from a
36
writing standpoint, I think that that's just where they decided at the professional level that scene could be cut and still preserve the core ideas of Dune, part 1 that they were trying to get to.
On a similar note, when talking about at a table, not the dinner scene itself, but there was this scene of where the Duke and Paul and a whole bunch of other people that part of the house were getting together just kind of to see what's going on. What is our situation here? What kind of gear have they left us? What kind of plans do we need to make? And that was also a long scene in the book. But that's why I was confused earlier. That was the one that was just 2 or 3 lines in the movie. And I love that they also, instead of sitting there talking about these things, they instantly cut to a scene where they're showing the thing that we're talking about. They're we're looking at the equipment. And I was great movie moment. It's we can establish this and then just move and show. And even that was very brief. So there were a lot of moments like that where it was I liked how it was, converted into the form of film and made it more.
The one thing, and I'll just say this too, I guess along, similar, I wish they didn't cut that secret room with the flowing water and the vegetation that Lady Jessica, there's that secret message there.
But why? Why would we need that?
Because now that I've seen the movie, my head auto-populates differently. Now I see Denis Villeneuve's vision auto-populating my image. So when she enters that room now, I'm I could see it all. And I could see her, Rebecca Ferguson's version of Lady Jessica in there. And so I thought that was awesome. It was cool reading the book because it's this bonus material, the deleted scenes that you don't get to see on the movie. So I was fascinated by the extra stuff in the book that was cut from the movie. And now that I know it exists, I wish there was what they did with Lord of the Rings. You have the 2-hour theatrical cut, and then you got the 4-hour extended version. That's the only version I watch now is the extended version. I cannot watch the theatrical cut. So I wish we had an extended version of Dune.
We probably won't have one, according to what I've heard, because people have asked Denny about that. At least one person did. It's will we get an extended edition? And he said no, and it's because for 2 reasons. One, if he cuts something, it's for a good reason, right? It has to be cut. And then 2, he was saying it's whenever he has to kill one of his darlings, it's so painful. He just doesn't want to look at it again. It's no. I just have to put that behind me.
All things being equal, I would agree with him, except that I know that the Lord of the Rings extended version exists, and that is the preferred version. So I think in worlds as large as this, having it available might have real value. That he might be underestimating on that one level. I would love to watch the extended version personally.
Well, Tomocrat says that there is a lot of backstory about Duke Leto. Well, and maybe there is backstory on that. But this book is the poster child for Tell, Don't Show. So if there is some backstory that tells me something about something, but man, it sure would be nice for you to actually put that in your story so you could see it.
So I'll just say this, and this isn't a bailout across the board, but so when I write about the Byzantine Empire, sometimes it's hard to just show because you're putting things in context that it's very possible that people might not understand. So sometimes when you have an exotic world, you have to do a little bit of both. You have to have someone explain little bits, and then you have to show how it works at the same time. Well, I think a modern movie where we all pick up on all the context, it's all show. You really can't do that. But sometimes you need to nudge people along.
Well, for instance, the Sardaukar. They're supposed to be the most badass warriors in all the galaxy. I would therefore show them as great warriors.
I agree with you there. I thought
never see them as great warriors. You're told, oh, it's Tell. This is Tell. You are told over and over again, these guys are the best soldiers in the galaxy. These guys, oh, you don't want to mess with these guys. You are told. But then every time you actually see them, they get beat up.
Yeah.
I mean, like I
agree.
had no respect for the Sardaukar in any of this.
Well,
I agree.
I know. You can say, no, their backstory. Man, their backstory is amazing. People tell you that, man, these are the okay, fine. But
yeah, you would have need to see that first, because if we saw just how difficult it is to defeat them, then we would appreciate more when someone does defeat them, because that's showing just how much because which is the effect that it was supposed to have, but that would have been a lot, as you're saying.
I agree. One of my biggest criticisms of the movie was that the Sardaukar did not live up to the hype at all. In fact, I would even go one step further. I was a little underwhelmed by their the design of their uniforms. They looked almost. Now, a lot of the costume design in this was good, but I thought the Sardaukar was a little costumey or something. It just didn't quite intimidate me.
I agree with you, Doug. I watched. It had been a while since I had watched it, since I read it. But then, okay, now because I had actually forgotten, like, even the word Sardaukar or something after the watching this, and then I watched, and then I read it, and I was still really underwhelmed by them. But what I had in my mind about what they were supposed to be, like, Praetorians, and all, and then when I rewatched the movie, their depiction, I thought was. Yeah.
Well, the best
point in this movie,
part of the Sardaukar in the movie, and it was awesome, and I actually loved the scene. Their introduction when they're all in formation on Geddis Prime, and they have those upside down crucifix people bleeding into the canals in the rain and they have that.
They have that on the opening credits. That sound, yeah.
Yes. I love that. I thought that was well done. And so I think that might be why I was like, oh, like, these guys are good. Look at they're crucifying people. These people are disposable humans just for and just to christen this army. Holy cow. And then, like Heath said, then they show up in battle and they're defeated rather often.
Their first introduction in battle is good, because you see them like, what is it? There's some people that are trying to defend the whatever you call it, fortress, whatever. And you do see them just get completely cut down by the Sardaukar. But then after that, Duncan Idaho just very quickly kills like half a dozen of them. So, which is supposed to show how good of a fighter he is, but because we haven't fully established what that means,
bingo.
It doesn't really have that effect.
Right. And so, and BGD says, right, it gets to a point about what the book is trying to tell you about what makes you an amazing fighter. That the book is trying to tell you that the environment of the Sardaukar is what makes them such amazing fighters. And that therefore they don't, which is why the Fremen can defeat them, because it's an environmentally determinist argument that the author is putting forward here, that your environment is going to determine how you are as a society. And the only thing that was a worse environment than what the Sardaukar lived in was what the Fremen lived in. That's what it's trying to say. But I'm not sure that it often. I mean, that is a theme of the book. I don't know that that is even conveyed as well as it could be. But yes, I agree, BGD. That's what it was trying to say. The reason that the Sardaukar will be able to be defeated by the Fremen, and also that the Imperial war against the Fremen actually strengthened them. That by fighting people, by killing people, by keeping up the pressure, you're not degrading the Fremen, you're actually increasing their power.
Yeah, you're like working like a vaccine works. You're
You're culling the weak of the Fremen, and they're only getting stronger and stronger and stronger as a result of your war against them.
Right. I would even argue that the military invasion of Arrakis, which my mind actually did a better job of auto-populating than the film. The film does an adequate job, but upon rewatching it, I actually feel that the military strike, the big strike, Order 66, was just slightly missed in terms of the high note that I think it needed to be.
Dang.
Well, no, not.
I love that part.
Listen, I still love the part, but on rewatches, I'm like, oh, I wish it was like they get like right here. It's like the guy that hits the thing, the strong guy, and it goes up to hit the bell. I feel like it just missed the bell. Like it gives me almost everything I want. I feel like it just missed the bell. I wanted to see a little bit more of a tactical play out. It seemed to be a lot of missile strikes and then like shadows in the background with fires. And so I was like, oh, I wish I knew a little bit more about what was happening here. I wish I knew a little bit more.
Audience type, I guess.
well, and again, 90% worked. It hit the 90% mark for me. So I don't want to make it seem like it was bad because it wasn't. But what I was trying to say is that whereas the Sardaukar fell short, it seemed like the main menace from the bad guys, the villains of the story in part one, really was their military strike, aerial strikes. On the planet. In fact, and then when they show you a Sardaukar, it's that guy that has the, hey, I can't understand things. Remember the guy, he can't hear, so he talks like childish, and she uses the voice on him. So the few Sardaukar we see up close are not even that impressive. So it was really the military might that made them more intimidating than the individual soldiers.
That I was thinking about what Drake was talking about with the theme and what you were arguing for. And it doesn't have to be true in real life, but with regard to this idea of environmental determinism and things like that, because it's very relevant. Yeah, what they are talking about, because Michael J. Pastor says any persecuted minority does this. And like, is this true? Because I was watching YouTube analysis on this and also Reddit analysis, like, is that true? So clearly within the context of the story, as Drake would tell us, it's true that the harsher your environment, the worse you are treated, the stronger you become. Right? That's what that is. And that's clearly true in the context of this story, but that may not be true in the real world. Like that, that may not be true in the world. Because, like, I mean, we can come up with two, obvious examples of wars going on right now. And are the people who are being beat up becoming stronger because they are being beaten up? Mm-hmm. Like, according to Herbert's philosophy, they should be. Like, the more the Russians beat up on the Ukrainians, the more they bomb them, the more they shell them, the more they attack, the stronger the Ukrainians should become.
Well, but there's logistical realities, population variances, and I would say that the Ukrainians and the Russians are rather comparable in terms of the harshness of their environment.
Well, you might also say that on Arrakis when you're like living around the desert and have no water. But Herbert is clearly giving you a message that no matter how much military might the Empire brings against these desert people, you're only making them stronger.
Well, but I would say, I think that's part of the point. The other part is that it's their home turf. They're harder to beat on their home turf. As a writer, if I was trying to drive that point home, I would really focus on the soldiers on Secundus. Show the harsh environment where they're training, and have the emperor or have like Baron Harkonnen say something like, "These guys come from one of the harshest environments imaginable. They're the best soldiers. Have them show us this environment." Show us that they're going to come into battle, and then you cut to the Fremen, and they're like, well, these guys come from a harsh... It's like the Spartans, It's like two different versions of the Spartans, and one has it slightly worse. I mean, is that what you were kind of getting at earlier, that both were stripped down to this the lowest denominator on the environmental determinism in terms of soldiery, and they're going to pit them together?
Well, I think so. I guess so. Israel's attack on Gaza. Okay, Herbert's argument seems to be that Israel cannot degrade Hamas by attacking Gaza, because that would be like the Imperials attacking the Fremen. that the result of what's happening in Gaza is only going to strengthen Hamas. They're going to be stronger after this.
I don't know if I got that was supposed to be like a main message to take away. I mean,
well, I don't know that it was a main message to take away, but I think it would. But it clearly was a. I think it was a message that's why the Fremen are able to defeat the Sardaukar. Like, why are the Fremen able to defeat the Sardaukar? It's because of an environmental deterministic argument, and that the attack is culling the herd. An attack only culls the herd.
Well, but actually, the Sardaukar did not really deal with the Fremen yet in the first.
They were also underestimated too. Like they assumed that there were so fewer of them. So
there is Dune.
They're just these, barbarians, these backwards people, but in fact they are very sophisticated. And I think there's that kind of like
Dune has
prejudice that led to their defeat.
Well, in terms of like military history or tactical reality, Dune as a battlefield has its own unique aspects. You can't just walk around in the desert. You can't wear shields in the desert. So any war or tactical troop arrangement is very dangerous on Dune because there's sandworms. They can hear you walking around. You have to be careful. They could swallow entire harvesting machines, and you have the shield walls there. Like, battles on Dune are not like battles anywhere else. It has its own specific limitations in terms of what you can and can't do.
It's also a matter of who's better adapted, right? And they're super adapted to their environment, whereas the people coming in, foreigners, so to speak, are less adapted to it. So that's also a disadvantage they have.
Michael's bringing up Vietnam, the idea of like the desert of the jungle as a variant version where we've been fighting World War II in temperate climates and maybe cold weather here and there, but then you go to a jungle, you can't see anything. Your aerial surveillance is for shit. It's a complete, there's malaria, there's different diseases, there's leeches, the rainfall, all of it is a completely different kind of battlefield. And even if you have technological superiority, it can be very difficult one-on-one.
The wrong technology, yeah.
Right, yeah, the wrong, or just, insufficient or inadequate to the terrain. So, yeah, one-on-one, it gets real difficult to fight that war.
Another point here. I could not figure out why there were still worms on this planet. This is the plot part, but I was like, man, why are there still worms on this planet?
What do you mean? They're crucial to the creation of spice. That's why.
Right. But shockingly, they only recently found that out.
No, I think it was supposed to be implied that like people that had like I think the Harkonnens knew that too.
No, he says in the book, Paul says, why don't we wipe out the worms? Why don't we get rid of them all? And he says there's just not enough resources to do that.
But that it wasn't implied that whoever was saying that was like that was kind of the official line, but that there were.
It was implied, yeah. Liet Kynes is who answers that,
right? Because Kynes knows the truth, yeah.
Yeah, and Paul senses that Liet Kynes is only giving half truths. That Liet's hiding something as well, which we now understand a little bit better. But it was addressed. It just wasn't addressed in a deep way. It was just kind of touched upon, and then they moved on.
Yeah, because how long has that planet been mined?
I don't know.
Yeah, a long time. And they only recently, and that doesn't seem like something that's publicly known. That you have to have the worms in order to have the spice. Because if you kill all the worms, you won't have the spice. Okay, that's important. And that's also cool from a story perspective that, the big threat is the worms. So I would say then they need to have known very early on that the worms themselves are a key to having the spice. Tomocrat says thousands and thousands of years. Right. So thousands and thousands of years ago, they needed to figure out that the worms are the key to having the spice. Because if they didn't think that, the worms are really easy to kill. And when I think about like how we just with very limited technology can nearly hunt whales to extinction and all of that, and even megafauna killing, if there was a highly valuable substance on a planet, with some large worms that were dangerous but very, very easy to kill.
Are they easy to kill?
He said they weren't easy to kill. You had to electrocute them in every like vertebrae.
Yeah,
They're not
I
easy
think it
to
was
kill.
complicated.
Like it tells you that they're like attracted. Like you can't wear a shield because they're attracted to shields.
Mm-hmm.
And if you shoot a shield with a laser, it blows up as an atomic bomb. So it seems very easy that you go, okay, put
Use
a shield
as
over
bait.
there. We'll stay about 10 miles over here. Get all those shields going. Once all those worms are attracted to it, hit that shield with a laser and blow that with an atomic bomb. I
feel like this is a prime example of my theory of the two different.
Yeah, it is. It is. I couldn't come up with a good
care less about this, but this is like really important for you.
It is. It is like. So why don't you kill all of those worms, especially if you don't know that they are the cause of spice? As soon as you know that, then you've got a much more interesting thing from a story.
I think it would have been better if they knew that and just said, "Look, they're off limits."
Yeah, I thought that was implied though, that the kinds of people that would be able to make those decisions knew. But whatever.
Maybe.
Yeah, it didn't bother me that much, but I could see it once you start going down that rabbit hole, how it could get you stuck.
I thought there'd be no worms on this planet. If it were this important, there would be no worms on this planet.
They're definitely important story-wise. Do you guys want to talk more about things that are different from that in the movie? Because I had a list of things.
All right.
I only got to like one or two of them.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, you want to go ahead? What were you about to say?
I was just going to say, so the dinner scene, we talked about that. The secret room. I love the secret room. Really wish it was in the movie. It wasn't. The other one was they had a plot line where a lot of suspicion was cast on Lady Jessica. And that was not in the film at all. And I think for the most part, that was fine. I really liked Lady Jessica as portrayed in the film.
Yeah, it wasn't really, it would have just added another, just more time, and it wasn't really necessary. The only thing that I find is regrettable about that is that it, there's an element of one of the characters, is holding this grudge against her, and it creates this interesting part in the second half where he's trying to kill her to have revenge. But then it's not really necessary, because even though it adds some suspense as you're waiting for them to, meet each other and stuff like that, ultimately it gets resolved anyway. So it doesn't need to be there for the movie.
Right. Well, and even in the book, I actually, while I was considering it, I was kind of getting a kick out of the plot line, because not even Duke Leto Atreides, who's the target of this suspicion, buys into it. He's like, I'll pretend to suspect her to throw them off. And I'm like, so it doesn't even work. You're casting suspicion on the target character, and the target character is like, I don't believe you. So I thought that was an odd plot line, and probably good that they cut it. But in the book, it was a bigger deal that Lady Jessica was behind some of the political intrigue, and in the movie they just dropped it completely.
Yeah, it just added some extra levels of suspense in the book, but it wasn't ultimately necessary to the plot. So yeah.
And to Michael's point, the Gom Jabbar scene, it seems like it can only be done one way, exactly how it was in the book. And one thing I appreciated in the movie was the cutaway, the flash cutaways of like a searing hand.
I know, that part was so good.
Yeah, I thought they did a really good job with it.
I noticed this is another note, but I noticed that there was a lot of like, for moments of mental instability, the movie used a lot of like fast cuts and those kinds of like, we're cutting to whatever you call it, like other shots. What's the term for that kind of a thing? It's not B-roll, but whatever. You're
an insert.
I guess insert, but that, I feel like there's another word for that specifically, but maybe not. But it would do that really quickly. That we had that also when he was having his like interactions with the spice, and he was, hallucinating and whatever. And I thought that was just an effective way to do that.
Yeah,
it was the change in pacing that created that feeling of, mental instability.
Well, and he uses slow motion for Paul's premonitions. Like when we see Chiani, she's moving slowly. It's all in slow motion. So he does give you certain visual cues as a director to know how he's using these, non-linear scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're right that a lot of them are in slow motion themselves, but they're short.
Right.
They're shortcuts. Yeah.
And yeah, this movie, like in that one where she stabs him, like the blood, it looks so terrible. It looks like so greasy and red, and just looks like such a mortal wound in the scene.
Right. Another thing, so towards the beginning, I really liked the breakfast scene that they had with him and the mom, because it took a lot of different elements from the book that, in the book we kind of learn over the course of several chapters in terms of like the dynamics between those two characters, some of the things that Paul is learning, and it just packed it all into one really efficient scene. So that was a good one. The voice, how the voice works, we just see it all really quickly.
Yeah, that's a great point. They did condense it for that breakfast scene, and I like that. Like that was a nice, comfortable. That was the Shire. This is your comfortable setting before we go off on the adventure.
I also appreciated that in the movie there was a stronger like refusal of the call moment. I don't know if it was there in the book and I just didn't remember it, but there was like I feel like it was added. I'm curious if you guys remember if it was in the book, but where he has that conversation with the Duke, with his dad, before they leave their home planet. And he kind of expresses that he doesn't want to be Duke, that he's reluctant to fill that role. And that also was a great way to show the relationship between the father and son, because you would think in a situation like that, you're almost kind of expecting him to be like, oh, you have to, because this is your responsibility. But instead, he's basically just like, even if you can't, like, you'll still be the one thing I've only ever needed you to be, my son. And it's just, it makes him such an admirable figure. Like, you really respect him more, but it also allows for that to be something that Paul comes into, and also they also emphasize this idea that he doesn't believe in the prophecies, because I think in the book he just kind of notices that they're like, oh, interesting, they have these prophecies. In the movie he actually shows skepticism and doubt, and so he kind of comes to believe in it, and I thought that was a good touch to kind of make a clear arc for him, and the period of 2.5 hours or whatever it was.
Yeah, and I actually think that Leto Atreides is portrayed very much the same in the movie and the book. He's very practical. He doesn't get caught up on the conspiracy or the prophecy or the mysticism at all. He's very practical. He's very grounded, and he does have that compassionate king, the benevolent king mentality that most of us usually find likable. He's an authoritarian, but he tries to care about people, and that earns a lot, I think, with audiences. And he's portrayed like that in the book, and he's portrayed like that in the movie. And I did love this scene, and that's actually a great point, Brianna. It is a refusal of the call. Paul's basically saying, what if I don't want the birthright? And his dad's like, that's fine. I love you, son. Whatever you want. You go your way.
When he tells him he might come into it. Yeah, he gives that sense that he also didn't want it. That at one time
he does say that.
Yeah.
And the father, they allude to it in the movie, but in the book we find out that the father is killed by a bull in a matador situation. And it's so, well, you know what? Here's one issue that I've had that I could not make any sense of. If you're talking about like something that bothers you. Now, it didn't bother me enough to derail my enjoyment of the story, but I was like, how the hell did a matador who was killed in the arena build such wealth and power to found House Atreides? It doesn't sound like there was enough time, and his profession doesn't seem like it's good enough to collect wealth and soldiers and planets and.
Or did he just do that like as a hobby?
That may have been a secondary thing. I would assume so. I get the sense that House Atreides has been around for a while.
And he was like Emperor Commodus, who just decided to thrust himself in the arena, as the emperor, and then got killed.
That's kind of how I thought that.
Yeah.
Like, hey, that's kind of what I thought. That was like his hobby. That's what I thought, that it was his hobby.
Okay, so Bane's son says Atreides is an old house. So, upon just my early reading on it and my early viewing, I had assumed that it was the father who founded the house or brought them up to prominence on some level, but apparently that is not true.
Well, there you go. Was there something you were about to say earlier, Heath? It looked like there was.
Well, I mean, I've got other things, but I
still haven't gone through all my list, but I just...
go ahead. I mean, because they're all in the same kind of style that the things that took me out of the story that this is a difference between the movie and the book that I think is done better in the book because it doesn't done better in the movie because it doesn't dwell on it. The betrayal of the doctor,
Yue.
Okay, the doctor is the traitor. Now there was a whole lot more, the suspicion of Jessica and things like that, but
misdirection.
They don't dwell on the misdirection in the movie. They just go with it, and I thought that was better because I thought that the doctor in the book was so lame. Because
lame? Why?
Yeah, because they make the reason they're like won't consider him. They can't consider him as the traitor is because he has been through this specialized training that he cannot betray his, the person he's dedicated to. And that's why he's just completely not even considered. Man, this guy has been through some specialized training. And at first I thought, that's really cool. Specialized training. And then the Harkonnen are like, we have figured out how to defeat the doctor's specialized training. Like this 1,000-year-old regiment these doctors go through. Like, oh my God, they figured out how to defeat the special training. How did they do that? And they're like, we kidnapped his wife.
Like, they did more than kidnap his wife. The implication was that they made him watch as they tortured her. That was what
I know, and that's like the very first thing you would do. It's like if like somebody came to
101.
I have been able to discipline these doctors so they will not betray the people who they are listening to. Like, really? Like,
capture the wife.
Will not do it. Like, okay, I'm going to do a test. Okay, what's like the first test you would think of? Torture his wife. That's like the first thing you would think of. But yet, apparently, that's like something no one thought of for thousands of years in this universe. So the bad guy's going, we captured his wife and tortured her. That's supposed to be the big thing that breaks this. I'm like, no. Yes, so the movie was better in skipping all of that. Yes, the Sulk school training.
Sook
school training. Yeah, I just did not buy it. The first bad guy who showed up would think of torturing your wife or your kids or something like that.
Yeah, that's 101.
So if your Sook school cannot, betray your charge training, no good. So skipping all of that in the movie was better. Because that was something that completely took me out of the story.
Well, and I'll say this to piggyback that a little bit in terms of a plot point that wasn't a slam dunk. It did its job for me. It did its job. And I was able to enjoy the entire story. But he seemed to make this deal with the Harkonnens to save his wife. And even in the movie, I never got the sense, at not even 1%, that he was going to get his wife back.
Well,
you know what I'm saying? Like, he's like, he betrayed his wife, or the Harkonnens took his wife. They were torturing her. And he's like, I betrayed them for you. They're like, great, dead. It's like, well, that was stupid. That wasn't well thought out.
But it was like an end to the suffering.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
like
it was from the language, you knew it was going to happen. Like, I mean,
so did he.
You have to think if you were him that you would have just known that your wife was dead.
He did. They said that he knew. He knew that. He knew he was going to die.
Well, I guess what I'm saying though is, if you want an end to the suffering, just take a cyanide pill and
yeah. By the time you know, especially if you have been through special Sook school training,
he wanted the end to her suffering, and that was the only way he knew how. Yeah.
Right. Again, it's you're betraying House Atreides to a genocidal level. Is it really worth it? Can you solve this any other way? Like, if I took a cyanide pill, that's it. I don't have to betray House Atreides. I could tell House Atreides the plan, take a cyanide pill, and move on. I mean, you're putting almost billions of lives at stake. So I don't know. It did seem a little thin, but enough to get me through. Like when I read it, it didn't bother me as much. But there were several times I was like, I don't know, man. He didn't seem to think that through that much. There didn't seem to be a real bargain ever made that he was going to get anything out of it that he really wanted.
Yeah, because the language was I forget what the language was, but I was like, if somebody told me, like the Baron told me that, I'd be like, oh, my wife's dead. That's not even.
Yeah, it's Harkonnens we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And then there's another thing that was really interesting where in the book his like awakening moment happened all at once. Later, after the house was attacked, when he was with his mother in the desert, and then in the movie they had it split into two different moments. So part of that awakening happened earlier, and part of it also happened later. And there were several different things that were happening because of that. Like on one, of course, it was a very obvious one where, in the book, the whole instance with the spice workers being in danger because a worm was coming is just something that we just kind of observe, which is fine because it's a book. We're just observing it. But that would have been not that interesting as a movie. As a movie, they needed to put the main character in danger. So, of course, they have them landing down there. They have him coming out of the craft and going and to help people.
Yeah,
and
Paul barely makes it.
Right. So that was just to make that scene more exciting from a movie perspective. But it also allowed, it did three things. I forgot. There was a second thing it did is it also, it emphasized the family's danger because it showed the equipment not working. So in the book, it wasn't an element of the equipment not working. Here, it was like the reason why they couldn't, get out in time was specifically because of things the Harkonnens had done. The Harkonnens had given them faulty equipment. So it was kind of reinforcing.
Yeah, the carry-all disappeared.
Right. So it was making the movie a little bit more concise in terms of, what kind of issues they're dealing with and what it means. But also the third thing was I feel like it made that shift in him be less shocking, because in the book, it was just like this massive shift that happened all of a sudden where he started behaving in a different way and talking in a different way with his mom, to the point where his mother was a little like kind of scared of him, kind of a little like weirded out. and so I think having that be, piece by piece, I think that makes that a little bit smoother too in the movie. So I thought that was a good adaptation for multiple reasons.
Did you know that the design for the film, the look for the Dr. Yui was based on Rasputin? They wanted him to look like Rasputin. This person, it was like their cue to have him appear like this guy who had infiltrated the family in a sense. And that they based the look of Baron Harkonnen on Brando's Colonel Kurtz.
Now that I did. Yes. I actually picked up on that when he was stroking his head. And then later when I was watching stuff, they brought that out, that he was down on that, because both he and both characters did the bald head stroke. And I picked up on that as I was watching that, and then they made it much more explicit because there are other scenes in it too that talk about Marlon Brando.
Yes,
that character. Yeah.
All right, I got four other things that were different that I thought were interesting to note.
Okay.
Number one, so we've got three different deaths that happened in different ways. Kynes, who was a man in the book.
Right, it was a man.
Kynes has a sort of this weird death. He's sort of left for dead, and it's also introducing this whole other thing about like the way these kind of explosions happen where like this, I can't remember how it works, like this pressure is building up under the ground and stuff, and it doesn't really come back. So it makes sense that we just stay consistent with things that are part of the story in more important ways. So Kynes dies, just gets eaten by a worm, but they made it a little bit more heroic. So there was like Kynes took down some more Sarkar with her. Apocalypse Now.
That was Marlon Brando. Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then Duncan kind of just dies off screen in the book. But then, so we got a little bit more of a tragic death. I still didn't feel that, especially the first time I watched the movie, I didn't really feel that I was ever as like connected with those characters as I wanted to be. Like I wanted that to feel more, but at least you feel something. At least you're like, oh, how heroic of him to, die, fight to the last breath to defend people. Like you actually feel something. Or I felt like that was just way too casual in the book. So I still think
it was better in the movie. It was.
It could have still been better. You could have still made me feel sad, but it was still better. And then the Duke's death, I don't know if you guys noticed, it was a small subtle difference, but in the book, he hears them say when he's been captured, and he's with what's his name, the Chief Baron guy. He hears that they haven't found the bodies of his wife and son, so he has some hope that they've made it. Whereas in the movie, the opposite is the case. That like he hears them saying that they're dead, and so you see him. He can't really move, but you see he cries, and so he dies thinking that they're dead. Which I don't know that necessarily like had any purpose other than just it made it sound more sad. It was a more tragic death. So it just to kind of hit the emotion there a bit more, I suppose, is why they did that. But I noticed that was different.
Yeah, and having him unclothed like that, like no dignity in these final moments. I
felt more for that character. You feel more like I wanted to feel more for Duncan. I'd like more moments to make me respect him the way I respected the Duke. But
one of my notes was, Frank Herbert is like half genius with his made up words and then half terrible. Like, Kwisatz Haderach is a great word. Like that's a perfect word. Shai Halud, like Arrakis, Harkonnen, like all these words are so great. And then you have like Duncan, Idaho.
Yeah, Duncan,
Lady
Idaho.
Jessica.
Well, I know that James is like just man. This is a sci-fi, and the guy's name is Paul. But then also Duncan, Idaho also sticks out to me. I have to admit, yes, when I read that, the last name Idaho. Duncan,
I did wonder about Paul, like what might have been the significance of that. I didn't think about Jessica. I was thinking about who Paul is in the Bible and if there's connection. Because I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it's fun to see if there might have been an intention.
Well, it's just such like it's like Jason. You don't want an epic with Jason. Well, I guess Jason and the Argonauts, but I don't know. Like some of these names are a little underwhelming, given Kwisatz Haderach and some of these other words that they have that seem so perfectly suited and brilliant. Bene Gesserit. You cannot invent better words.
If it's familiar, I said there is the benefit perhaps of feeling a little bit grounded with familiarity, because that's a problem that you always have with when things are too distant. So maybe that was the intention behind it.
Yeah, I mean it's possible, but Lady Jessica bothers me a little bit less than Paul. But like Leto Atreides sounds like Leto is familiar enough that I can grab it and go with it. But Paul sounds like the kid I went to grade school with. So it did seem like a weird blend of brilliant words and then like shockingly simplistic words as well.
Here's my theory. So Paul, more so than Jesus of Nazareth, was super influential in the beginning of Christianity as sort of the father of starting that religion. And even though Jesus is the actual martyr figure, it was Paul that really established what church doctrine was and like what it was that Christians believed. So I wonder if there's any connection, or if that's just a sort of a coincidence that you have this Paul here, and Paul Atreides is a figure of this new religious movement. So perhaps
that could be.
That's not gave him like a Jesus sounding name. That would have been too obvious, like we would have seen that coming a mile away. But so maybe that was kind of a subtle way to give that meaning.
No, that's a perfectly reasonable theory. One other similar tie-in. Paul is like the false Messiah. Same thing with Anakin Skywalker, with the Chosen One in Star Wars, with Lucas. The more I understand Dune, the more I see the crossover with Star Wars.
Oh, I didn't think about that influence. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Tatooine, Krayt Dragons, the Chosen One, like
the false one.
It's very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Tomocrat, thank you very much, Tomocrat, for $4.99. Tomocrat says, "Thanks, Heath. You ruined one of my favorite books because the lame doctor now." I'm sorry about that. I'm very sorry about that.
You know,
I used to do that a lot more.
There is one other difference, but I think I'm going to save that for if we talk about the Bene Gesserit, like just in general, because there was something that was changed about that that I thought was also improvement. But maybe we should come back to that. Those are some things that I noticed.
We should talk about the de-Islamization between the movie and the book. I mean, I don't suppose you can do a comparison without talking about that.
Oh, you want to know what's crazy? Is I started reading Cameron's book, The Mother of the Believers.
Oh.
And I hit pause on it because we said we were going to talk about it on the show. And I was like, I'm going to save it and read it so it's fresh and I can really contribute. So I hit pause. And then the next book I read was Dune. And I was like, these are almost identical stories. You know, you have a Messiah character. It's in the desert. It's very jihadi, or not that the word jihad was invented right away, but like it's a similar setting. You know, it's in a desert. There's this figure that emerges and rises. So it was just interesting that I read those two books back to back. You know, I doubt many people have.
So there was a lot that was talked about in the popular press about like removing the word jihad.
Oh, really?
Because the word jihad is not in the movie.
Yeah, well, maybe it'll come out in part 2, but I guess we'll see.
Don't touch art. You got to leave it.
Yeah, I think I would have. I think I would have kept it because that's part of this world. Because instead he talks about like instead of there's going to be a jihad rate wage. Doesn't in the movie, other people in the comments can confirm this. He just talks about there being a holy war.
Right.
He doesn't actually connect it to an Islamic tradition.
Not that I know of.
Yeah, that's what I think. So the
yeah, honestly, the wording in this I thought was just part of the character of the world. You know, like when you say Obi-Wan Kenobi, that sounds Japanese. It doesn't, bother me or anything like that. It makes it cool. It makes it interesting. So for me, I thought it made it interesting.
And what got rid of the AI was the Butlerian jihad.
Right, the Butlerian jihad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which I've actually seen referenced a couple of times now in the even with Sora that was just released. I saw on Twitter or somebody, or X now, somebody was like Sora, and somebody responded, "You want a Butlerian jihad? How you get a Butlerian jihad?"
Like, I know what that is.
So like, okay, well maybe that's how we end up
becoming more into pop culture. That's great. Yeah, it's funny. I remember when Dune Part 1 came out. There was someone that I followed on Twitter, now known as X, I guess, where she was complaining about how she was like, how did she put it? Something like Muslim culture isn't an aesthetic or something like that. Or she was complaining about how there were in that world. It was like, I don't know if it was she was complaining about the book or the movie, but it was like, I think maybe it was both. I don't know. About like taking these elements, but then just kind of using them as an aesthetic. And then she was like, why are none of the actors in the movie, like from the Middle East or something? And I just kind of thought that was a strange comment, because it's like, well, a lot of the elements of that, maybe I didn't know about at the time. I hadn't read it, so I didn't know that there were like specific words, like jihad that were like in the book. But it's also just like, this is a desert climate, and so you got to take inspiration from somewhere. And you'll have similar types of technologies that will develop. Similar types of clothing and stuff like that in order to deal with really intense desert situations. So I think that's part of the reason why you will see overlap. Because there are a lot of different desert environments in our world, so you could have drawn from a lot of different cultures to how they dealt with heat in order to.
Yeah, as a creative person,
okay.
I don't know any creative that doesn't draw from the past to get some idea of how did humans solve the desert. Oh, this culture did. This culture did. What they look like. I'm going to bring that into my fantasy world. I have no problem with that. And I think that artists should be allowed to do that.
It's almost impossible to avoid. That's the thing. It's like,
totally.
There's only so many different solutions that you can actually come to for surviving in certain kinds of environments, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't have a problem with that. I think, I think art is a special case, and I think you have to let artists do their best and come up with the stuff. And all art, really, all creativity is synthesizing several different things. It's like alchemy. You mix this, you mix this. Oh, that's a cool idea. I'm going to put that in the story. You know, if people start coming in and saying, oh, you can't do that, creatives are going to be less willing to be creative and more cautious. And I think to some extent that can really hurt art.
There was a time where I got kind of crippled, where it was hard for me to like, even that word is problematic to some people. Well, I got to a point where I really did freeze up when I was writing. There was like a year where I was super involved on Twitter, and I was in all the really toxic communities on there, and it literally did make it like I couldn't write for a little while. I had to get away from it. So genuinely true, yes. Yeah,
it can get in your mind. I had to, even with Faraway Bird, I had to make up my mind that I was just going to write it regardless of what all the possible criticism, because when you think about all the possible criticism, you become paralyzed. 100%. Because
criticism. This is the kind of people that they're not trying to figure out what's the best way to tell a story. They're like getting caught up in these minutiae, like trying to find something that I'm trying to be as gracious as I can here. I just feel like it's a weird emphasis, because, you know, I'm someone that does care about issues like representation and how it can be harmful, but it's like it's a smaller, you can overthink it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. People will overthink it. Yeah.
So to piggyback that with Faraway Bird, I could not. I had to get over the paralysis. I had to just write, because you've read the book. You know, there's a lot in there that I was like, better not write about this. Better not write about that. On top of that, I think you need to forge ahead and write what you want to write. On top of that, do your homework. And I do think if you care, and most artists do care, talk to people. Find out if you are doing something the right way or the wrong way, because there is a lane to drive down, and you don't want to get outside that lane if you care about getting anything right. So I think do your homework, talk to people, and then create your art. And then let the chips fall where they may.
But then when you're creating a science fiction or fantasy culture, that's where it's different. It's like you're creating something fictional now.
Right.
And so that you can't misrepresent a real culture when you're creating a fake culture. You know what I'm saying? So that's one area where I kind of don't apply the same principles. But
right. Fantasy, science fiction, I think you have a little bit more latitude.
Specifically with cultures.
Right.
Although again, I would add a lot of qualifiers to that, but I think
like I said, there's it's not, to me, it's open world in sense of how you can be creative. But I think if you care about getting things right, if you care about making the connections, if you care about people reading and being like, oh yeah, I'm into this, get out there, talk to people, run it by people that might care, and just see what they say. You don't have to, if they're like, I don't like all of that, you don't have to listen to everything, but listen. It
helps to hear. Yeah.
Listen and then make your decision. But you can't do all this in a vacuum. Anyway, and also, I'm glad Frank Herbert wrote it like he did. I love it. I love these classics. By some of the modern standards, you wouldn't have any art. You wouldn't have any of these classics.
Was there more on that? It felt like there was more you wanted to say on that, Heath.
Well, I wish they had preserved it. Since that was the way that the book was written, it seems like it was overthinking and look at oversensitivity instead of the application of this world, and the religion, which seems to be a cross between Catholicism and Islam, in what is going on here. And that since it seemed like so much seemed to respect the way that Herbert had done it, I would like to have thought that we were at a point in our society today where you could mention something like a jihad or a Butlerian jihad in the context of Dune and not think you're going to face tremendous pushback.
Maybe we're not.
So that I wish we'd done that. I'm not even sure they mentioned the Orange Catholic Bible.
Not in the movie.
In the movie?
No, I don't think it came up. I don't think it needed to, though.
But
yeah, it's not a vital reference, but it is in the book.
Yeah, it's kind of, this seems to be the implication I got, is just that, all these religions that we're familiar with today, elements of them are still in the future, so they've evolved and they've kind of become new things. And so that's why you have language that's still lived on. Like you have language, phrases from the Bible, and you have language and whatnot that you find from Islam, and that it's not, they're not saying that like the Fremen are Christians or that they're Muslims. Like I think those things are kind of the past, like, but this elements of them have evolved and they continue to exist in this modern society. So
yeah, in fact, I actually think it was used effectively because Catholicism is not recognizable in the film. So it's almost like you have to your point, Brianna, there's these like original ideas, but in the expression of culture in Dune, they're not recognizable anymore. The culture has so overlapped them that you might hear like, oh, the Orange Catholic Bible, but there's nothing like overtly Catholic about House Atreides.
Right. I mean, this is supposed to be like whatever 10,000 AD or something. So it would be weird if any of those religions still existed in the same form that far in the future.
Exactly.
Like, those religions are only like, Christianity is only 2,000 years old right now,
Right.
And it's already changed tremendously in that period of time. Islam's like 1,500 years old. So it's like, that it makes sense that it would be like the way it is. I buy it.
Exactly. But I loved it. I had no problem with any of those issues while reading Dune. I felt very much absorbed in the world, and I thought it was good world building. Like I said, the way he writes, Frank Herbert, it reminded me slightly of Hemingway in that he writes simplistic sentences that seem to hit all the right archetypal notes for your mind to process it and kind of gobble it up.
Here's a scene that was not in the movie. The foam and the compass.
Oh yeah, because they shortened the period of time when he's their journey through the desert to find the Fremen. They just kind of brought it down to what needed to be there.
But also trying to even understand in that scene, like I think if I were an editor, I'd be like, we do not understand what you are trying to do with making battery foam in this desert. So that was a good call. Let's just not put that in the movie.
That was an easier cut.
That was an easier call than the dinner table. Like, okay,
yeah, totally.
Let's skip that.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Heath.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if we're still on the theme of differences between the two of them, maybe I could just talk about the Bene Gesserit element if you guys are willing to.
Okay.
Because that's also just a broader conversation too, just about them in both. I think that's another fun place to go. So I could talk about the difference, and then that could lead into us just talking about them in general, if you guys are down. But unless there are still more things you had on your list of differences, then we'll just go wherever the conversation goes.
Well, yeah. No, go ahead.
Okay. So the moment when Paul and his mother and Jessica, when they're both captured and they're about to be killed, that was different, and it was different in a much better way. The part in the book when that was happening. So in both cases, their captors are talking about, taking advantage of Jessica and all this. And Paul is, don't touch her, all this stuff. But they're both like trapped. There's not much that either of them can do. But it was very strange the way that was written in the book. And I did not like it. Like the way that the voice was being used, it was almost like she was using it seductively, kind of a thing. And that was so disgusting to me. Like, it was just like a weird, like she was like, almost like describing, like, she was like moving her body in a certain way that I was like, I don't like that they're talking about raping her, and now she's like using this almost like seductive version of the voice to like get them to do what she wanted. It was so much more cool, so much cooler in the movie where she just commanded them, and that was like there was so much power to it.
I did like the movie version better myself.
Right. It fit the tone right. It gave her the right kind of power for that moment. And also, it was weird to me that like Paul was trying to, he was trying to use the voice, and in the book, the mom just kind of discouraged him, but there was like no backup plan. This was one of the few moments where I was slightly taken out of the book, where I was just like, but he has to do something. Like, your guys are gonna die. She was just like, no, you're not ready. I'm like, oh, what else?
Who cares if he's ready?
So in the movie, she kind of protests at first. She's like, you're not ready. But then she uses her hand signal, and she's like, find the right tone. So she gets on his side, that's the best plan to do, because that made more sense. So
I would even add, in the movie, that is the definitive scene for the voice. It made the voice, it showed you how dangerous, how powerful that is. Because the second it worked, these guys had no answer for it. And so Jessica, which by the way, you have the captive heroine scenario. Suddenly the role reversal is so instant, and it's so harsh and authoritative. And the way Denis portrays the voice with a kind of a little bit of a delay and a almost like a harsh, or authority, sound to it. Beautiful. I love the way the voice is portrayed in the film, is with that delay. And even in that first scene when she's at the dinner table, or the breakfast table, we should say, with Paul, when she kind of closes her eyes and like feels the voice when he tries it on her, and then she's like, almost. It gives you just a little bit of a hint of what this could do. And then in that scene, it all comes together, because suddenly she's like, cut his throat, do that. I'm like, the voice is dangerous. It really elevated what the voice could do. And I thought it was a wonderful scene.
If I recall correctly, I think one of the interviews I was watching, the like sound designers, the chief sound designers on this film, they said the voice was what they were working on the most. Like they were really? Like tweaking that like throughout the edit. They just kept coming back to it and like making it a little bit better. So that was a lot of love went into making that just right.
I always picture actors at the premiere because they don't know. They don't do any of this. All that's done in post, right?
It's like other actors' voices being overlaid.
Yeah, I picture like actors or actresses in like the premiere, like looking back at the sound guy being like,
good job.
You nailed it. That was awesome. That scene that I did where I sounded like nothing, you made it really intimidating suddenly.
Do we want to talk a bit more about Bene Gesserits, or do you want to talk about other stuff, Heath?
I was just going to, I'll answer Bane's son to say that he said that it was a good scene in the book. It shows Paul using his training to solve problems and finding his buried mom. This is the scene with the
other scene,
the battery acid and the spice. I think that is what it was trying to do, was trying to give you a heroic moment with Paul, that he's going to be able to figure something out and solve a problem to help them.
And he noticed a weakness in himself because he panicked.
I think that's what he's trying to do, except for I think I would have said, if I were the editor, okay, like he needs to do that with like a drone that's chasing them or something, because this property of spice that it interacts with battery acid and you're getting sand wet. Can we come up with a more action kind of oriented way for him to figure this? Because I was reading, because I was reading like pages of Reddit text about people trying to figure out exactly what is going on with the chemical reaction of what to what, and then the battery can't, and the compass or something like this. I was like, yes, this is confusing. I would have come up with something, because it's not like in the rest of this book the chemical reaction of spice to battery acid was important in any way. Like, I would have come up with something that was more clear, because that does seem like it has been that idea has been a stumbling block to people. I
can agree that the way that was written was confusing, but I don't think I would agree that it needed to be an action scene, because it's science fiction. And so much of science fiction is this brainy element of like using technology to solve problems.
Now that is where I was
right. So it was being true to the tropes of its genre to have him use technology. Yeah, use technology in that moment.
Do not show battery acid in scene 1 unless you will use it in scene 3.
So there was elements. I think I would have sort of a half agreement that I think that could have been integrated better into the further story and stuff like that. But I think it was overall it was just a very typical sci-fi moment of like, because it was dealing with technology, and it was also a character moment. And it's not very character, but it is somewhat character driven story in terms of him realizing, okay, I need to be fully in control. That's a very important thing for his character, is like he was not fully in control of himself in that moment. So he learned that was something he had to, get over his like bodily reactions to moments of crisis and stuff like that. So there was that too.
Well, I know I'm for, and I understand that moment. I understand having that moment with this character.
Yeah.
But I would have said, all right, let's come up with a different way to do that. This scene that was dry. All right, next.
Dune Resurrection by Heath Robinson.
So with the Bene Gesserits in general, because I'd love to just talk about them, because I feel like there's so much that's really cool about them archetypically.
I love the Bene Gesserit.
Especially, I knew you would, especially when it comes to feminine stuff. I think it's very interesting that their superpower is voice. Doug, why don't you talk about that? What about heroines and voice?
Well, I mentioned the Bene Gesserit all the time, or several times in the Heroine's Labyrinth.
Oh, cool.
They actually meet two different archetypes. So one is a lot of feminine characters do have. There's so many variants of clairvoyance in female characters, either women who are highly attuned intuitively or have some sort of ability to foresee events or to interpret events or to understand something right before the critical moment occurs. So the clairvoyant female archetype, there's so many. You have the old crone, you've got the sorceress, you've got the fortune teller. There's so many different versions of this. And also in the book, I analyze something what I call the beast as ally, in which you have a female character or heroine dealing with a character who is not like her at all, very unlike. And they have a lot of these female characters have an ability to build a bridge with those characters. And it's the cornerstone of romance novels, becomes a romantic overtone. But there are also variants where it's not romantic for the female character or the heroine to build a bridge with an unlike creature. And I said one of the main variants is there's the bridal ambassador, which is like Lady Jessica. And then there's also the highest version of this, which is the female diplomat, a character who builds a bridge with an entire culture and often is able to avert wars or steer geopolitical events. And the Bene Gesserit fuse the feminine clairvoyant and the female diplomat together. And it is an amazingly powerful order in Dune. Women who have these abilities to foresee events and even plan events, and then also attach themselves to all these powerful houses in the role of an ambassador and steer events that way. So they're kind of a double archetype, and both on steroids with the Bene Gesserit. And then when you see them attached to all the different houses, and they're all kind of in it together, and even the houses understand this and don't know if they can trust the Bene Gesserit, but they can't afford to not have them. That's a pretty unique dynamic in story anywhere. So I was a big fan of it, and I pointed out that the Bene Gesserit work, I think, because of that double archetype. But what were you going to say with the voice, Brianna?
Oh, just that that's a common thing for a feminine hero. You think about like calling things out, or like we talked once about, we were comparing like masculine and feminine heroes, just like, and the most, obviously lots of characters are elements of both, and Paul being a great example of this. But instead of having the courage to fight, it's the courage to speak.
Yeah,
like speech is often very associated. Speech, and also there are a lot of other ones, like healing things that are broken. Or
Ariel, her voice is what she trades in Little Mermaid.
Yeah, so these are also, but these are just the common recurring themes of like feminine characters. And I thought it was cool that became like almost like a superpower, so to speak. That was their so it was just, there's a very feminine order in the most strict sense of the term. Yeah, that was all I wanted to say about that. It's just,
I think that's a great point. Yeah, and I think that Dune portrays that so strongly.
Right.
Like I said, that scene in the Omnithopter, I wasn't scared of the voice until they started to use it. Then I was like, ooh, ooh, you could do so much damage with that. Like, that is very powerful. It was like showing you, it was like teasing you with the superpower and then showing you, and you're like, oh, you could do it. You could wreak havoc on the world if this was misused. And then it kind of shows you why it's so important to A, have the power cultivated, and B, to have a disciplined order. These people, they're not just using it helter-skelter. They're very tactical, very practical, and very strategic with their decisions and planning and the use and placement of the Bene Gesserit throughout the universe. So,
which is why they were prepared to kill Paul at the beginning if he wasn't able to pass their test, if he wasn't going to be someone that was in control of himself. That you can't have this power. Like, you can't not anyone can use these powers. Like, so they had to make sure he wasn't going to be dangerous, which I guess he still kind of is. But.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually I did not think about that. But yeah, like, if you're going to be endowed with our powers, you have to be the kind of person who's disciplined to keep their hand in that box,
right?
And not be the kind of person like an Anakin who might go off script here.
Which is intriguing because on that note, again, this is more part 2 stuff, but just a brief note on it, that for Paul, it seems to be almost like they misunderstood what the danger was, almost like they wanted to make sure they had someone that was fully in control of themselves, but it ends up being because he is so in control that he becomes dangerous, just in a way that they weren't expecting. So I don't know. We'll leave that.
Believe it or not, the scene with him and his mother in the the still tent. What's it called? Is it a still tent?
Maybe a still suit.
It's the still suit, but yeah, the tent that does the same thing, basically.
I think I want to say it was called the still tent. I could be wrong, but I actually really love the scene in the movie where Paul starts to, like you said, it's different in the movie than it is in the book. But Paul begins to emerge in that scene, and a war in my name, and he's kind of like in this like trance, this frantic like self-awareness, like coming up in waves. I actually really like that scene, and the way Timothy Chalamet portrays it, I thought was very. He was perfectly cast because he looks so young and unthreatening. They show him in bed. He's like all lanky and skinny.
Right. Physically, he has that youth look, but then he has this like intensity that he has in his eyes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which comes out in the Gom Jabbar scene.
Right.
When he at first he's like, this is tricky, this is gonna hurt, and then he kind of faces the Mother Mohaim, and she's looking at him. She's like, this guy's dangerous, but like capable, dangerous. Yeah, I thought Timothy. There's something to say about his performance. In fact, a lot of the actors and actresses in this, I thought, really knocked it out of the park with their acting performances.
I watched, like I said, I watched lots of interviews. I've been very obsessed with this movie. And I watched like a long one with the editor. And he said that there were scenes where it was so painful to edit because he was like, they had he gave an example. I think he was talking about the scene when the Fremen leader comes, and then he spits, and at first people think, oh God, that scene. He was saying that scene he ended up kind of holding, I think, on just 1 or 2 actors for it, and it was painful because he said every single actor in that scene, we had coverage of them, and they all were just acting their heart out. He's like, it would have been a great scene to just be on that person or just be on that person. And he was just saying it was such an interesting thing to work with. All the cast of the movie were just so good that anytime you cut anything, you're like, man. But
from a directorial point of view, there's all those little things that never translate anywhere else except in an interview like that where you get to talk about it. There's no other place for it, and it's such a shame because there's so much more to the art that just ends up missing from the final product.
Yeah, it is what it is. Everyone puts their best there. They put their best forward because they don't know if their coverage is going to be used or not. They usually just assume that it might be.
Yeah, and that is a great scene too, and I love it because even the viewer is tricked by that scene when Stilgar spits, and you're like, "Ooh, that guy just spit at that. He's really defiant." Like you're with them, like, oh, he's grabbing his sword or his knife and everything. And then Duncan Idaho was like, "Thank you for the gift of your body's moisture."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh yeah, on Arrakis that would be true." So it's perfect because A, you're offended when you first see it, and B, it makes absolute sense that this wouldn't be an offensive move by the Fremen. It's very well done.
On the note on like body's moisture, this is going back to the book. One of the scenes that I thought was so effective, which I don't know if this will be in part 2 or if it's just because it's like right on the edge of where the story split. But when when Paul, that guy that he kills at the end, and then he becomes
James.
part of the culture. Yeah, in the book, he's really distraught about it. Like it's the first time killing someone. He's pretty upset about it. He ends up crying, and everyone is so moved. They're like, "Oh my, he's giving water to the dead!" Like it's this huge thing. Like for someone to cry in a situation like that.
Oh, that's right.
I thought that moment was out of the whole entire book, emphasized more than anything else how precious water was on this planet. The fact that you had like almost a taboo around crying, and that if someone were to cry, that was like a huge gesture that you were doing publicly to show people your grief. And they also had the thing about like with babies that you're supposed to let the baby cry and cry and cry, and that they're getting all of their cries out, and that you're not going to you don't want to cut that short. That's something at the end that's more part 2 stuff. But yeah, similar thing, because you want to conserve your body's moisture. Can you imagine what that would be like having it? Because like there's such a release and such an importance with being able to cry, that like it's to just have a taboo against that would be like, I say that, I guess there is kind of one against that for men in our culture, so not to the same extent, but it's not healthy. But that would be intense.
I don't know if it's a taboo. I think for guys sometimes it's an attempt at self-control. And I think some of that stems from the idea, because like it's funny, like with guys, like you watch a guy score a touchdown, he's like, yeah, there's always a violent there's an urge for violence, so self-control becomes pretty important, and I think that's an extension of that. I think sometimes guys get unfairly pegged for not, like, how come you don't cry? Or guys don't care about feelings. It's like, well, I think there's a logical strain there too. There's an effort to stay under control despite what might be overwhelming emotions at times. But
there does seem to be a cultural difference, though. This is a totally different topic, though, with like how much that is shown in like modern stories versus more ancient ones. Like, I think it wasn't and always seen as a less masculine thing the way it sometimes is now. But I think that's also changing. I think our culture is adjusting. But whatever.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there is. It's much less of a taboo today.
Yeah, for
I don't
sure.
think people care as much today as they used to.
Yeah, for sure. What's the next topic? I've got a million, but let me throw it back to our host.
We briefly covered this character, but I thought that in the both the book and the movie it was done badly. I didn't get it, and it seemed like it could be such a fascinating character, but it was the planetologist,
Liet Kynes.
I
liked her in the movie.
Yeah, I did too.
I thought this was, when I was watching the movie, I remember being particularly disappointed.
Oh,
because they had talked about, because one of the things I really liked is all of the build up and the world building that we're talking about, and we're giving the emperor is commanded the change between these two houses, and then they introduced this character, the judge of the change.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh, so yes, there is the emperor's personal, a person who is going to, to be the eyes of the emperor over this change. So this is going to be a really important person, who is going to be doing this. And then we get to, and so I was completely underwhelmed when it was Liet Kynes. It's like, this is the imperial judge of the change to ensure that everything is done correctly. And then even in the book, like when you get to him, and he's like a guy with some filing cabinets under the ground, I was like, man, I am not believing it. Talking about, but like that idea being done better. Like when you think of, okay, we're doing this exchange, and there's an emperor, but he's going to be impersonal. or this or this can be impersonal, but we're
Neutral.
sending somebody to, observe what is going on. It's the adjudicator in John Wick. Remember, is that John Wick, I believe 3 or what it is, the woman with the short hair who shows up, and she's the representative of the table. Yeah. And when I was watching the movie for the first time, and they were talking about, and because even they're kind of like speak of the judge of the change with reverence. Like in Leto's, like, we should meet the judge of the change. It's time. And there's all this stuff's going, like, are these people sabotaging this equipment and this and whatever, and all this stuff's going on, particularly on this really important planet. And I was like, the judge of the change. Judge of the change is going to be an important person. And I was completely underwhelmed by that. That character needed to be somebody like the adjudicator.
I did not have much of a problem with Liet Kynes. In fact, I actually thought that the movie version was slight improvement. She got a little bit more involved in the story. And I didn't. So here's the thing with the reverence. The title certainly gives that impression to me, that this is a neutral party, with high esteem, like a Supreme Court justice, but the emperor's luring them into a trap. So this judge of the ward, isn't really that neutral, as far, and the judge seemed to have really sided with the Fremen in a lot of ways. So I don't know. In the movie, I thought she was pretty effective. I actually liked her character. She had a good presence in the film. I even thought, at the male version of the character in the books was good. I love the title planetologist. For a character that just gives such gravitas that, it makes it sound like you know everything about a planet, ecology, flora, fauna, that you have this level of expertise. It was a secondary character, so I guess I didn't mind too much.
That's kind of how I felt too. Like, it wasn't really like an important character, so I didn't really have any like expectations. But she was interesting because it was like, she had multiple allegiances or multiple like what's the phrase I'm looking for? I hate it when this happens, but I just can't think of the word. It's so annoying.
Motivations,
almost
agendas,
whatever. I can't think what the phrase is.
Loyalties.
Something of interest. What's the phrase? Something of interest. What's the phrase?
Person of interest?
Huh?
Person of interest?
No. God damn it. Just whatever. Multiple things pulling her in different directions. But then there was a shift.
Oh, a pivot. A pivot?
No, that wasn't what I was trying to say earlier. I gave up. I'll think about it like at 11 p.m. tonight.
Angles.
It doesn't matter. Whatever. Moving on. Then there was like a shift where she kind of changed her mind, and that she was then not going to be a neutral party anymore, but she was going to tell that information, bring it off world so that people could know that the Empire was involved in this slaughter. But of course that didn't happen.
Right.
But I thought that was interesting. The book version had a really great quote as he was dying that I wrote down that has to do with the overall theme of the story. Let me find it. He's like as he's dying, he's like thinking, he has this like realization of one way that things could go, which I think is supposed to imply like the way things are going to go. Yeah. And he's like, and it's like not a good thing. And he says, no more terrible disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero.
Oh yeah.
That's one of his like auditory hallucinations as he's dying. That's a really interesting quote because it at first doesn't make any sense. Like one of the worst, it's like one of the worst things that could happen is to be fell into the hands of a hero. So foreshadowing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, big time.
I guess in the movie we do see the Atreides get the orders.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. That was a cool moment.
Which is in keeping with the books. Like, is this something interesting? Then it's not on camera. Like they moved that onto camera in the movie, and had this powerful ceremony, which I really liked. And I thought that was an improvement by actually showing them receive the orders from the emperor.
Yeah.
So I thought that was to the good to have all of that. But like the guy who plays the herald, like that whole amount of gravitas and things like that, especially since you've seen that now, and they're talking about how expensive this was, and they've got all the ceremony and stuff like that, and he's speaking with this powerful voice and something like that. So then if you told me that you were now encountering the judge of the change of something as powerful, as important as the exchange of Arrakis, I would have thought that it was a character like him. Like that's a guy who has ceremony, right? Because like if I'm the Duke and I'm like, man, these Harkonnen have sabotaged my sand crawlers. Let me go talk to the judge of the change. And I talk to that guy, I would know that he would have the ear of the emperor. If I go and talk to Kynes, who's in an underground area with some filing cabinets, I would not feel like this person has any kind of authority.
Well, it may have also been that that's the kind of character that Kynes was at one point, but Kynes has been going native, you know?
Yeah, he went native.
Yeah, so a little bit more of a, that would bring a bit more of a kind of.
Well, he brings up a good point. There doesn't seem to be any level of ceremony with the judge of the ward. Is there, like he said, that you have this orb land, you have this martial formation, you know, everyone's there. It's very formal that he has to do the ring and sign it. So it's very ritualistic and formal. And then the judge of the ward is kind of like, what are we doing today?
Hey, like,
what do you got for me?
And so you would have thought then, I would have expected then, if that's it, for one of our main characters to be like, oh my God, something's up here. Like, because people in the comments have been talking about, okay, that the judge, the change is supposed to be playing for the emperor or whatever. But that it just seems so obvious that, okay, this person
is not playing for
to be able to help us in any way. You know, this. So I don't know.
Yeah, I could see your point there. It would have actually probably highlighted, strengthened the character to have had some semblance of ceremony still attached, that this character was half-heartedly following and also half-heartedly not following. Like, I was just watching an interview about aliens, and they were talking about the colonial Marines and how, you know, the military order is supposed to be very serious and rigid and disciplined, and yet, you know, like Vietnam soldiers, sometimes that, you know, you move away from the formality and you start individualizing your uniforms, which you're not supposed to do. And so you can show a character who's caught in both worlds. And to your point, Heath, they really did not show that there was any imperial world still a part of the judge of the change. There didn't seem to be any imperial influence there.
It's still so funny to me, the things that are big trip ups that are not for for one of us, but not for the other. But I do wonder if my one critique that is only applicable in the second half, if you guys will end up sharing it, we'll talk about it next week. But it's not even a big critique; it's just something that I wanted to be different.
I can't wait to see Dune Part 2. By the way, I can't wait.
Cannot wait.
And from everything that's coming out early on, it's all positive, like super high marks. So this could be. We've been waiting for a long time. For, you know, we had Lord of the Rings, and we had you know, we've been waiting for another great work of cinema, and it's been a while.
Oh, I know. There's been a lot of garbage. It's part of it's like we've been starving, and it's not even that our standards are low or anything. That like it's even if our standards, even if we were used to getting really great stuff, this would still be great. Like it's still like getting a feast.
Yeah, we've had some good stuff, like plenty of good stuff here and there.
Here and there for sure.
But we're missing something that in 20 years we might look back at the way we're looking at Lord of the Rings today. We're like,
yes,
oh man, that's semi-recent, but it's already a classic, and we know that.
People will watch this now for sure.
Yeah.
I'm looking at what remains. I'm trying to skip over the stuff that I think is going to be for next week. Well, just putting this out there, just so you guys are aware of what I have left. I think what I have left is as some notes on like some of the archetypal stuff related to the world building, and then some notes on like the last 20 minutes of the film. which I know Heath has opinions on. At least I think he does. And then I've got some other stuff that's just about the film, like just the film, that has nothing to do with the story. It's just like I'll geek out on as a director. I can say
okay.
if you want. But so that's what I have left. But
and that is great, and I would not mind talking about the casting and characterization of the characters themselves.
We did kind of talk about that already. We did kind of hit that.
I think we did. But
you have anything else you wanted to add, Doug?
Well, why don't we cover Brianna's topic first? You seem like you were ready to go there.
No, I was just saying that those are my 3 topics I have left. But I think talking to the last 20 minutes would still be like in keeping with the themes of what we've been talking about so far. It's kind of like story structure, kind of.
Let's go. Let's go there, because the last 20 minutes of the film was kind of its own section of the film. You had different parts of the film that led up, and then you have this sort of transitionary period, which closes out Dune Part 1. Paul's now out in the desert. He's with the Fremen, and we're in Fremen culture, and there's a warrior culture there. He has to fight this guy. So I would not mind talking about that at all.
Did anybody think that Jessica was supposed to be pregnant with Paul's son?
What? No. With Paul's son? What the fuck?
Yeah, she's pregnant.
Yeah, she's
I
pregnant.
knew that, but
and that it just seems
daughter. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, she's pregnant with another Duke's child.
Right.
But that seemed a really
big
random
character coming up.
Yeah. It seemed like she was supposed to be pregnant, get pregnant in that still tent. But that idea got dropped.
Really?
Did anybody else feel that way? I guess not.
No. I don't think any of us were thinking incest.
I didn't think that at all.
I did have that note that I was like, it seemed like that was what was supposed to happen, but that got.
Here's one of my predictions. I'm curious to know what you guys think. I don't want to give too many details, but I suspect that. Well, no, it can't be. I was going to say that I think that element of that pregnancy won't come into the movie, but they did mention it in the end of Part 1. So
they did mention it, and I think
it's a weird part. It's a really weird part of the second movie but
it's
really weird.
Major character.
It is a major character.
Major character.
But I don't know if you. I was trying to think if you need that character. Or if that's one that they're going to take out. I guess not. I guess they will have the character in there. Yeah, it's a strange one.
Yeah, very strange, but that's more probably Dune Part 3. See, I feel like Dune Part 2 is going to be a little bit of the end of Dune, the book, the first book, and probably a little bit of Dune Messiah. That's my guess.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. I think
and then I think Dune Part 3 is going to be Dune Messiah with some sort of a bookend there.
Yeah, they'll just call it Dune Messiah because it's like Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2 is the 2 parts of Dune.
Yeah, that's true.
Dune Messiah. That's how they're going to. I think how they're going to word it.
Yeah,
so that is kind of confusing. It's probably inevitable. People will continue to refer to it as Part 3.
Yeah, we barely even talked about Chani in this, and she's really conveyed through a lot of. I'm sorry, am I derailing anything? Were you talking about something, Brianna?
Oh, we didn't get to talk about the 20 minutes, but we can.
No, let's do that. We should, because that's an important close off to the film.
I really want to know. I kind of want to let Heath talk about it first because I feel like you had some issues with it, didn't you? With the ending of
the end of this?
Did you? Maybe I'm misremembering. Maybe you didn't. Because the pace, there was a kind of a potential issue with maybe I should just say my thoughts and then see what you think.
Yeah, I don't remember that because I know. I mean, people have critiqued it, including like my brother and his wife, saying that it just kind of ends. That it might end in a weird place, but as long as you know it's a Part 1,
right,
then I don't so much of a problem. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I ended up kind of changing my mind about it because I felt the pacing is I don't know, it's complicated. It's kind of weird because from a plot perspective, you feel like things should be wrapping up a little bit sooner, I think, because it feels like I think you kind of feel like it's supposed to end about 20 minutes earlier. Like the movie. I
agree.
Just because of expectations you kind of have in terms of like what's typical in movies. But they ended it there because that was what was necessary for his character. And I feel this very strongly. I came to that conclusion, but then also I was confirmed for me when I was watching all these interviews. Like there was with Greg Fraser, the cinematographer, he was talking about some of his favorite shots from the movie, and he mentioned one from that scene, and he said this particular shot, I think it was when they were all putting their hands on his back, kind of accepting him among them. He's like, this is the movie. This shot is the movie. This scene is like the most important part. And I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. Because it's like, this is a story, the part one, where they decided to end it. Because it's not exactly at the middle. It's not like they took the book Dune and split it right in half. They ended it around 60%. He's starting off being skeptical of this role, of these prophecies, and even of being Duke, being a leader and all. He's resistant to all those things. Then by the end, he has stepped into this role, and kind of into this prophetic role, but also him becoming part of the Fremen is really important too, because like he's constantly looking, with his dreams of the future and all this stuff. He's constantly looking in that direction of the Fremen. So it has to end with him then becoming part of them, and so that creates a solid arc for him. Even though it's a little bit weird plot wise, like I feel like if this was being written fresh, if this was not an adaptation of a novel, I would take issue with it. But it's one of those moments where it's kind of this slightly awkward pacing, but it's necessary to stay true to the book. And in this case, being true to the book is more important, because that's, you're being true to this very passionate fandom, and that's the ultimate thing here. So I think it's kind of it's a little bit of an imperfection, but I came to believe it was the right choice given the other option, which would be to mess with the story too much.
Well, and sometimes once the story is complete, things that felt unresolved or slow or not that big of a deal take on a whole new meaning once you know the full story. Right. And I think Michael actually mentioned Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back did not have a good solid resolution. The good guys lose. Infinity War had the same thing. Here's this big epic battle. Oh, the bad guys lose. The good guy wins. Cut. What? But now that we've seen Endgame, now that we know the whole story, Infinity War is one of the best films of the whole series.
Yep.
Empire Strikes Back is considered one of the best films of the whole series. So sometimes when you're writing something, and by the way, I'm doing it even with Far Away, but there are things I'm setting up in future books that seem to be relevant or are relevant in subtle ways in book one by itself, standalone. But once you know the whole story and you go back and you reread these chapters, you're going to be like, oh my God, that it's a whole different context. What they just said to each other, what she just said there, what just happened. It all takes on a whole different context because the story is complete and we know what she means there. We know where this ends. So I think Brianna's right in that it doesn't mean it's a flaw until we've seen the rest. If we see the rest and these things go unresolved or unanswered, like the Star Wars sequel trilogy has tons of these. They open up all these plots and none of them go anywhere. And now it's a big problem.
Right.
But a good story that bookends it, sometimes it just doesn't matter because now we get it. We understand where it's going better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are just my thoughts on that. Why it was the way it was.
Yeah, I do think it ran long. In fact, rewatching
I think it's because of that. Largely, it's the ending is where it at least drags for me. But maybe
there was while rewatching it, I was like, oh, that's right, we have this whole fight with Jameis, and then I was like, oh, so there was a part of me that wished they could have sandwiched it a little bit. But again, I'm gonna wait till it's a finished product, and then I'll know how I feel about it in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's some big stuff coming up. Like I said, I didn't read the book till I saw the movie. And when I read the book and I see what happens next, when I know what's going to happen in Dune Part 2, I was like, wow. And the whole Fade Rautha was completely skipped in Part 1. So there's a lot of things that they just completely omitted and they just slid over to Part 2.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, and this line is in both the book and the movie, when Paul tells you what he's going to do, that he's going to go and take his case to the emperor and marry one of his daughters.
Yes.
And I was like, all right. We've got a new direction for this book, because this is about when I started to check out, because I was like, all right, we've had all this stuff, we've had all the drama, we got all this set up with the politics and all of this, and now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go take my case to the emperor, marry his daughter. I was like, yes, all right, so that's where we're going for the second half of this story. Like that sounds awesome. And then, no, let's go. No, well, we're not doing that. We're going to go walk around in the desert.
Oh, but that part is so important, though.
It is.
No. Let me make the argument, though, because this is a very common archetype, a very mythical archetype, where you have a hero that goes out into the wilderness. They go out into the wilderness and they come back changed. And it's only when they come back that they can be the person that they have to be. Jesus had that. I'm reading the Old Testament right now. There's a whole endless examples of that happening. Another version is you go out into the desert, you go out into the wilderness, and you meet God. That's a common example. You have some sort of a spiritual revelation.
The Watchmen had it with Dr. Manhattan when he went to Mars.
Yeah. The Israelites. You just mentioned Israelites. I was thinking about that, like wandering in the desert. So Paul is that's what Paul is doing. He has to go into this wilderness, and it makes his return that much more powerful. So I think it's an archetypal thing. Whether or not that was what Gilbert thought consciously, that is what it's doing, I think.
It could.
Yeah, I agree.
It could definitely be that, Brianna. It can definitely be that.
I think it is that.
I know. I think it is. That's fine. But then it just seems like there were so much.
That's right.
Like even when Jessica is talking, and I'm like, yeah, that's because Jessica's like, my son has to get off this planet, because I'm going, because the Duke's probably got a bunch of allies, and he needs to get back to Catalan, the home planet, Caladan, the home planet where he's got his base of power. Yes, that's exactly what he's gonna do, and he's got it in his mind. He's gonna go and take this to the emperor and marry the daughter. Yes, Jessica, you're exactly right. Get him off the planet. Let's get this show on the road. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. We're going to go walking with the Fremen. Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, man, that's such a weird reaction. I'm sorry. Like that's
I know.
Really some of my favorite parts, because we're dealing with him, integrating with a different culture. Like I love that trope. It's a very fun science fiction trope where you have to people that are living a completely different way, and you have to come and you have to understand them, and that there's going to be some key coming and understanding and adapting to this other culture ends up allowing you to then accomplish another goal. I love that.
Well, it's liminal space too. You're in between worlds. And that's kind of where the Fremen exist. They exist in this liminal space of Dune.
Yeah. The Baneson says House Atreides does not have Caladan. Well, do you know what I would have done? I would have said that in the book. I was reading long Reddit threads about the status of Caladan, because I completely thought they still had Caladan. I mean, nothing in that book or in that movie told me that they did not. I mean, so I was completely with the people who did not think they had to give up Caladan, because that would be like, in modern terms, like the king telling the Starks, not only, it would be one thing to tell the Starks, you now also have this fief over here, but to tell the Starks, you're giving up Winterfell. I'm taking you away from Winterfell. Like, man, that would be like some scenes with some discussion about, this has been my ancestral home for thousands of years, and we've ruled over this place. They never do anything like that in this book. So I completely thought that they still had Caladan. And apparently I'm not alone. Now, apparently they didn't, but it takes pages of Reddit threads to go through that. So I did not pick up on that at all. I thought they were getting Arrakis, like from most all of the book. I thought that they had Arrakis in addition to Caladan, but then that's why I was confused. But then apparently it's not, that they actually had to vacate their ancestral home, but never even mentioned that or shed a tear or talked about that or something. So that would have helped me if I had known, like if I knew that Paul does not have a power base of Caladan, then I changed my mind. I was reading that. That was never written in the book.
That's a good point. There should be some discussion, because I think the instinct would be to return home.
Yeah, the instinct would be to return home. I've got to get back to my power base. And Jessica even says that's what my son has to do. And I was like, bingo, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah,
and also,
but it was implied that like he was seeing different possible. He had all information about these different possible futures, and that she thought that was rationally. She's sitting here in the moment. This is the strategy. This is what we should do. But he has more information than she does, and so he makes a different decision, and she ends up trusting that because of that.
Well, and you'd have to imagine that Caladan has billions of people loyal to House Atreides.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And also, it's not like the Bene Gesserit are anything to sneeze at, because Jessica's like, I've got to get a message to the Bene Gesserit. I'm like, yes, that's exactly right. Let's start getting, because, there's a lot invested that they've invested in Paul. They've clearly invested a whole lot in this planet.
But,
I mean, they'd come by and seen him.
And so that he could become the very person that he is in that moment. So
I was going to say the Bene Gesserit are kind of like, whoa, let him work it out. Let him work it out. Let's see what happens.
But Jessica says, I've got to get a message to the Bene Gesserit.
And then she changes her mind because he is becoming that person that they wanted him to become. And he's becoming this person that can see the future.
Well, even in the book.
And so he knows that the best thing to do isn't to go off world.
Well, and even in the book, the Bene Gesserit are aware of the probability that he could be, the Kizat's Hazarak. They talk about it. They're like, well, it shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't be this, but maybe. And Mother Mohaim is intrigued by Paul. So I do think the Bene Gesserit, who have planted the prophecy, who have been crossbreeding the houses and everything to build up to a guy like Paul, or who it's supposed to be. They seem to be, like, in my mind, willing to see what happens. But I think what Heath's trying to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is show us that thinking process. Let Lady Jessica contact Bene Gesserit. Let Bene Gesserit say, wait and see, show that there's some movement there. I think that there's a case for that.
I would definitely have done that. I would definitely have done that.
I don't feel the same way, but whatever.
I was like, it should be easy to get messages off this planet, because they're always talking about how there's smugglers coming in and off of this planet and stuff like that. And I'm going,
and that's more
that also seemed like a Chekhov's gun that was supposed to go off, because it seems like if you're a prince on the run, like, what's a great way to get off planet and back to your home base and stuff like that when you're thinking that there is a home base? Like the fact that you've seeded, there's smugglers all over this planet that are going back and forth. Yeah, like the smugglers to me were a Chekhov's gun in this, because I was like, oh yeah, he's going to get on this smuggler's ship and be able to get out of here and stow away to the Emperor's home planet or whatever. It didn't. Okay, there's smugglers on the planet. Okay, never mind. That's fine. It doesn't start.
What's next? Are there more stuff on your list you want to talk about, Heath?
I noticed that a lot of people want to talk about whether or not this was a deterministic universe. That's the big part of Dune.
I do feel like that might be more of a part 2 discussion.
That's a part 2 discussion.
I think that's a part 2.
Yeah,
I think so.
All right.
Because that is a very big question. I have a lot of thoughts on that too.
God, I can't wait to see it. I don't know if I think I already did say it, but we're going early. We're going on. This is the first time I'm taking my kids on an opening night to a movie.
Cool.
We're going at
6:30. Opening night myself.
What's that?
I don't think I've ever gone to like an opening night before.
Oh, so. I've done I'm an opening night type of guy because I'm a movie.
At least I'll be opening weekend.
Well, and that's good too. Opening night is very special, and I've been telling my kids about it. Now we're going to a 6:30 show. It's not like the midnight show, but it'll be the first time that my kids get to see it. One of my boys is 8, the other is 11. They know Dune. They like the movie Dune. So I can't wait to see how this all plays out.
BGD says that Count Hasmir Fenrig, friend of the Emperor and leader of a minor house, took over on Caladan as a ruler in absentia. Was there anything in this movie that told you that?
No, not at all.
No. Yeah, you could watch that entire movie and have no idea that Count Fennering is taking over Caladan. Like, that's not something that's even.
However, Dune Part 2 could address this, and then it changes the context of the first film to where that becomes less of an issue.
Yeah, so that's, and in the book, I mean, you could have actually shown that. If that's what happens, you could have like shown that, and like, that could have been a real emotional scene if like this Count guy is now assuming the seat of Leto's grandfather, and what that, and then you would know that they are don't have Caladan anymore. But
Heath, those are good ideas. Again, I don't think it ruined my experience of Dune, but I see the merit in adding more to the panoramic situation of what's going on.
I guess it's also just like it has to be efficient. And so, they're just giving the amount of information that you need in order to be able to follow.
Well, my point is, listen, Dune is a classic. This is one of the best sci-fi series ever written. Mm-hmm. So to say they did it wrong is odd, but it's not like I can't see what Heath's talking about. Like, if I knew some of these other plot points, I might like it better. And it sounds like the plot points are out there, but it took all these other books to kind of build out what's really happening to some extent. So, knowing that, you could build some of that into the film, and maybe it would be better, But again, that said, as is, I did not have, I wasn't getting snagged while watching it. It sounds like Heath was getting snagged.
I was getting snagged a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever got snagged. Again, I think we're different kinds of viewers.
Well, but if I was in a writing room and Heath was bringing this up, I would entertain all these ideas.
Oh, me too. I would for sure.
Yeah, I would entertain these ideas, and then maybe they would make the cut, maybe they wouldn't, but they're certainly good ideas. They hold merit.
Sure. I'm not, when I say that, I'm not trying to disagree. I'm just saying it's like, it's funny to me because it's like these things I just don't care about. Like, they have no effect on my enjoyment, but they're important because for someone like Heath, because I think it's a pretty big, I think it's a minority, but a very, very large minority of people that think this way. And so ideally you want a story to appeal to work for both kinds of viewers, both kinds of readers. That's something that I try to do, where I'm like, okay, I know I'm not that kind of viewer or reader, but I know that like if I'm not thinking these things through, it's going to trip those kinds of people up. So that ideally any story needs to work on both levels, where anyone that's sitting there thinking about all the things that don't make sense, like it should make sense. And also, for the people that, really need to have this, like, characters that they connect with and go on an emotional journey, you need to make sure you're doing those things too. So none of this is at all to dismiss what you're saying, Heath. Hopefully it doesn't sound like it.
Yeah, certainly not. But
well, we've said that, like, which is more important, the plot or the story? We've said this several times.
But Dune is a special case. There's a famous like joke phrase, almost like a meme. I read Dune for the plot. So Dune is a special case where the plot drives the power of the overarching plot does drive the story more so than other stories.
Maybe.
Well, we've said which is more important, the plot or the story, and we've said on this that it's definitely the story. Mm-hmm. That you have to get the story to work, and if you don't get the plot to work, but your story works, people will forgive that.
Most people, not all people, but yes.
Well, keep in mind, in a political intrigue, plot means two things. Like, to plot the downfall of a house is the plot of the story. And what I'm trying to say is the power of that plot against House Atreides is so good that it does drive a lot of the action and intrigue in a way that perhaps, the plot in Star Wars doesn't, or, something else. So I do think Dune has a little bit of a plot boost. Because of the gravity, because of the overarching scope of it.
The way we were using plot and story, like when we were talking about plot, we were talking about the physical elements that you were seeing on the screen or reading in the book, the events that are leading one to another. And is it more important to have a coherent plot that is going from, or to have a coherent story? And we've said it's most important to have the coherent story. And if you can have the coherent plot as well, you should.
So then I would ask,
it's okay to compromise plot for story, but it's not okay to compromise story for plot. But ideally, you would compromise neither.
well,
It's not. It's not okay to compromise story for plot, right?
So then I would just ask, why does Dune work? Why has Dune withstood the test of time? What is it doing correctly? That's what I'm trying to answer. Is despite flaws here and there, I think its plot is really potent in a way that other stories aren't. Other stories don't feature this ultimate checkmate, right? This is an ultimate checkmate mixed in with a messiah character in a science fiction world that's so unique. So I think all of these things coming together really make a unique experience, and I think that's why Dune works. And all I'm trying to say is I think that the plot in this is a part of what makes it work, more so than other stories.
I would say that it seemed to me as I was reading it that I would say that a tremendous part of its staying power has been or its influence has been its founder's effect. I don't think you can discount the founder effect. Clearly, this was revolutionary and seminal and keystone for its time. The things that were done in this book that were not done in others. And so you end up tracing a tremendous amount of other sci-fi material to this book. And nobody had, it seems like nobody had seen anything quite like this before when it hit.
Right.
So like, okay, man, this is something completely new. Like I am thinking about it, judging its politics and so forth by things I have seen after completely. I have by what George R.R. Martin has done, stuff like that. But you hadn't ever read George R.R. Martin when you read Dune. Right. So when you were coming at Dune, nothing like this has ever been done. Its world building is clearly fantastic. Seeing something like this, boom, this hits. I think that the founder's effect of this genre probably cannot be understated with why it is so seminal.
Well, I think that is true too.
Because Michael says, can the same thing be said about Tolkien? And I do want to go into a lot of, I would love to do some analysis very soon of Tolkien, because yes, you might be able to say some of the same things, because if we're critiquing, like for instance, and we're not going to get into that right now, but for instance, if you're getting into a critique of Tolkien, one of the things people talk about is Tom Bombadil. Do you need this Tom Bombadil chapter? In fact, we even have Tom Bombadiling a chapter being a verb now. Okay, you Tom Bombadiled this chapter, which means it's got to leave. So would you do that today? No, you wouldn't. So we could say that's a flaw in Tolkien, but we have a tremendous founder's effect in what this was and what this kicked off and everything it's going to. I think it's very similar here with Dune.
Well, but keep in mind, there's still a caveat on the founder's effect. So Lord of the Rings, Treebeard. I remember laughing and then going back and counting the pages. There's a 42-page conversation, 42-page conversation with Treebeard. A tree talks for 42 pages. And I was like, no way would an editor allow me to write this and be like, hey, there's a great section and there's 42 pages of a tree talking. You're going to love it. The editor would be like, rewrite. Don't even give it to me. Rewrite it first. However, but it taught me a lesson too. The founder's effect has the advantage of a less established authoritarian version of what you can and can't do. Because these guys were doing shit that you're just not supposed to do today, right? We're so evolved today that we cut things off. And all I told myself while reading Lord of the Rings was, don't listen to anybody. Learn the rules, like master the rules, like figure out what works and what doesn't. But if you think it works, keep going, because that's what these founders did, right? That's what these guys did. They went with things that some person in a studio today would say, don't do it. Don't write Tom Bombadil. Don't write Treebeard. Those are bad calls in retrospect. The founders had free space, but what I'm saying is that free space is good for creativity, for raw creativity. And I still think there's a place for that raw creativity even today. Even if you're not supposed to do it, that you should trust your instincts once in a while and run with it anyway.
On the note of things that work, I was just looking over my notes about. I was talking about. I have notes about archetypal stuff. I think I got to save that for the next discussion. So we'll put a pin in that. There's some things that have to do with like the sandworms and what they mean.
Oh, yeah.
So I think we're gonna have to.
I want to hear Brianna's analysis.
I want to put that in there so the people will come and watch our discussion next week.
Yeah. So what I'm here. Ender's Game. I once Ender's Game.
Ender's Game. Oh man, that's actually I was thinking about this. I was like, because Dune is one of my favorites, one of my new favorite classics, but it's not my ultimate favorite. I think it's Ender's Game. Really? That one. Ender's Game hits me. I'm at that core. I'm at that core.
Really? I was a little underwhelmed with Ender's Game.
Okay, fine.
No. Listen. Knowing you, I know that you're going to make great points. That it's going to make me rethink parts of it. But my impression, I was very underwhelmed with Ender's Game.
Just to be clear, I'm talking about the book and not the movie.
Right. I've never even seen the movie.
Don't.
I'm sorry. I did. I think I did see part of it, but I don't have any memory of the movie. I'm talking about the book.
But what sci-fi has as much world building? I mean, today we have much more world building in sci-fi.
I would say,
and also Thrones is not sci-fi. Not to be all, but it's not. Thrones.
Wait, what?
He said, other than Thrones, what sci-fi has as much? That's one of my. There's a difference between science fiction and fantasy.
No, Game of Thrones is not sci-fi. But I would say that today, but this has to do. It's not a fair comparison because we have lots more world building in sci-fi today.
You'd have to compare it to things that were written around that time.
Well, no, or in a single book, because clearly, like the world building of Star Wars. I mean, when you think of everything that's been done to Star Wars,
Trek,
I mean, the world building of Star Wars is just.
I would even throw in Arthur C.
Star Trek is out of this world complexity of world building. Warhammer 40K, even. I mean, is
Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 series is actually pretty wild. I've read through 2064, I think it is. I mean, there's nothing like that. I mean, that's pretty wide panoramic scope too.
It would be in a single book, like that is going to give you.
It's not as wide. Dunes isn't as wide, but it's deep. I think that's one of the things that makes it so
Starship
fun.
Troopers.
It's like there's a lot of details in the world of Dune of this one planet. Like we know a little bit about some other history and some other planets, but it's like we spend a lot of time really understanding how this planet operates, its politics and its geology, and so it's a specific type of world building. It's deep as opposed to expansive.
At the end of the day, I'm a fan of Dune. I have fallen in love with the world and the universe, so I like it. And the films are making it. I think we're on the cusp of a classic film series here with Dune. So
I'm really looking forward to it. So I'm going to watch it this weekend. So I'm looking forward to it because I did really enjoy the first movie. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they.
And I heard the second movie, the pace has picked up. Because the first movie is slow, and I would say effectively slow for the most part.
Right. It's all set up largely, so.
Right, but I heard Dune Part 2 moves much quicker, and I've just heard nothing but good things, man. I'm so excited.
I hope it does. I hope it's amazing. I hope I absolutely love it. I really would love to. I would love to love it. So,
are there any other notes in story before I go and start to geek out on the movie as a movie?
Oh,
I want you to geek out, Brianna.
No, I've basically covered my notes for the first movie.
Okay, good.
So, yeah, I'm at the end of my notes for part one.
Sweet. All right, so here's why. Where do I even start? Why I think this movie, from like when I say movie, so I'm going away from story now. Okay, so I'm just talking about the execution of it as a film. To me, it's perfect on so many levels. One of the things that I think I really appreciate the most is how they execute their VFX. And it's something that, so Greg Fraser is the DP, and I would say he's my favorite DP. It's like my favorite DP and my favorite director working together. I've listened to how he thinks creative, like interviews with how he thinks creative. I really like his approach. But so Greg Fraser, some things that he's also worked on would include like the Batman. He also worked on the Mandalorian and Rogue One. He has lots of credits going on back quite a while, but his most interesting stuff is recent. And there's a common element. I guess it's partly just directors have been starting to hire him for this because he's good at this in doing genre stuff where it's fantastical, it's science fiction or whatever it is, or crime, superhero thing, but making it feel very grounded and very tangible and real, like it's something that you can reach out and touch. There's this element, and it's because there's so many different reasons why. There's obviously a lot of different things going on, not just cinematography choices. So many things that are going into this, but it's that this is a really high priority that in this film, and part of it. So there's a lot of things going on. One of the things is that for all the VFX in this movie, there's always something that is real. So or at least almost always. There's a principle that was really important to them. That you're not seeing like a screen that just everything that you're looking at is completely generated. There actually are a couple instances that I know that happened that would surprise you, that you actually think are completely live action because they involve humans. There are a couple moments that are completely computer generated, but for the most part, they would have elements. They would always try to capture something in camera. That way they have that to build off of. Also, when they did capture things on camera, they didn't use like blue screens or green screens. These are this is something that Greg Fraser plays with a lot. The volume. I don't know if they use the volume. They might not have used the volume in this, but he's been huge in pushing that technology. Yeah, Mandalorian. Yeah, so he was big in the development of that. But in this one, what they used a lot was called sand screens. So here's the problem with blue screens and green screens. We all feel it intuitively, like when we look at something that's set against a blue screen or a green screen, like we just kind of know that it looks fake, but it's hard for us to exactly say why. And part of why it feels fake is because it's almost impossible to get the lighting right when you're in that kind of studio environment. Like it's almost impossible. Depending on what you're filming, it may be impossible. And that's because and without knowing exactly what the environment is that the characters are in, it's like you can't really match the lighting that they would have. Like you can do your best, but we're so good at telling when things are fake that you're not going to have exact daylight. It won't feel like daylight unless it is daylight, for example.
Yeah, there's like layers of two-dimensional things.
There's a lot of things. You have this in a lot of the ways that like Marvel movies are filmed, where it's like they'll like an explosion goes behind you, and then but you still are able to see the character when there's an explosion behind them. That's fake. That would never happen in real life. They should be silhouetted in that moment. You know what I'm saying? Like, so the lighting doesn't match. That happens a lot because you don't know exactly what it is until you go and then do your special effects at the end. So it's backwards. So the cinematographer that's filming it can't get the lighting that's going to be exactly what's going to be in the final thing, and it feels off. And so they would do in this movie that doesn't happen. Everything looks real even when it isn't, and that's because they were always had something practical. So they would always have lighting that was there to mimic. Like if there was explosions behind them, they would have flashes of light in the studio that was similar to what's going to be in the final image. And then also, instead of using blue screens or green screens, they use something called sand screens. So the sand screen was like a sand colored background that would allow the actors to have this like very natural looking, it would be the lighting on their face would matches very much what is going to be in front of them in the final image. But also they would be able to invert that. So like if you inverted the sand screen, it would be blue. So if they ever needed to create that mask, they still could. That makes sense.
Really?
Yeah.
It's so that you're saying that because it's a sand colored screen, when light's bouncing off of it and onto the characters, it's actually bouncing the color of what is supposed to be there onto the characters rather than a blue or a green. Exactly.
And that creates trying to get rid of that blue and that green is a constant issue whenever you're filming in that environment, and the result always feels kind of fake.
Yeah, some directors go with an entire blue tint to the whole film sometimes to try to get around that.
It's terrible.
Michael says that's why the volume is so good, because the lighting on set comes from the volume, and it is, yes, but they couldn't use it here because they were saying that, first of all, like one of the things I remember them saying was that it wasn't bright enough.
Oh yeah,
They couldn't simulate the outside desert on the volume. That's why they were always filming outside.
Yes,
so
they would.
That's one of the. They might have used the volume some or something, but that's one of the reasons why they didn't do that.
Yeah, it's that definitely wasn't a big part of it. A lot of it, like you're saying, like they would be outside and they would just have like a sand screen that they would then use to expand and build more. And then of course they filmed an actual desert, so some of it is genuinely you're seeing what they filmed. And yeah, or like with the what do you call them? They look kind of like helicopters.
Ornithopters.
Ornithopters. Thank you.
Love those things.
Yeah, those were you should watch stuff about how they developed those because that's pretty cool. But same thing, like for that, they would film a helicopter, coming in. So then they would get all that really natural, the way that it was interacting with the sand, for example, and then they just replaced that with their digital version. So everything was always like there was something real, and they would get as much of it as they could in there.
And it comes across; it all looks authentic.
Yeah, it's genuinely so amazing because I feel like we're so used to seeing things like this that look kind of fake. It's so authentic, and these are some of the reasons why.
Yeah, I hope we're on the edge of an era where CGI takes a back seat again.
But that's the thing, CGI is not the problem. It's bad CGI, and it's CGI that doesn't have enough of a base to go off of. People.
Yeah, I'm not again. Well, what I mean is. Yeah. Oversaturation of CGI, which is what so many films rely on. And to your point, it just ruins it because it looks so fake all the time that none of it looks real. And it just makes it gulf between me and the movie. But you're right, Dune, that was not an issue with Dune.
So that was the principle, like try and get it all on camera as much as you can, and then just using VFX to CGI to expand. to do what you can't actually get in the camera. Anything, if you can get in the camera, get it in the camera. That was kind of
Peter Jackson. He used a ton of practical effects on Lord of the Rings. A lot of those were real, tangible things, even though they were miniatures or forced perspective and things like that. But I think you're right. This guy, Denis, or who's the DB you're talking about?
Greg Fraser. Greg Fraser's the DB.
Greg Fraser.
Yeah, he does. I'm obsessed with so many of the people who are in this film.
Awesome. I love
that. So another thing, this is more a directing note, in terms of like the choice of shots. Denis was very particular about making sure that there weren't a lot of medium shots. There are some, of course, but it's mostly close-ups and then these big, wide, epic shots. Close-up, big wide epic shot, and so this was making it so that we're keeping with the intimacy of these characters, but then also having that sense of scale, which is so important. Although seeing it in the theaters, because I didn't get to see Dune Part 1 in the theaters the first time it came back in the theaters, and I saw it again. That's one of the things that just is kind of on a superficial level, but it's not superficial. God damn it! Like that's. I don't know the words. That's that feeling I was talking about earlier. Like having these massive, these massive ships that are just like moving slowly, and they have the right kind of shapes. The design is so good.
Organic looking shapes.
You can really feel the size of it. They have just enough texture that it doesn't look like it's a miniature. It doesn't look fake. It looks like it's this massive thing, and it creates that sense of epicness and scale.
Now that you say it, that those long shots, one of my favorite shots is it's a perfect aerial, and they show like 3 ornithopters gliding over the desert from a perfect, like it's straight down, and you just see and it looks totally authentic. It looks like you're watching actual footage from Arrakis. So that's an interesting point that he has he juxtaposes those like mid shots with the long shots. You compare that to something like The Silence of the Lambs, where there's all these like super close-ups of people talking to each other, just super close-ups of the face. So this doesn't really have any of that. This has those mid shots and the long shots. You're totally right.
Well, it's not a lot of mid shots. It's a lot of close-ups and then big wide shots.
Yeah, but they're not those extreme close-ups.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, you're right. There aren't very many extreme close-ups. Enough that it's like you feel like you're interacting with the characters. But like one of the very few ones is the one with the little mouth. Which I didn't make the connection until I was hearing there was a panel with the VFX artist. They said that little shot with the mouse had the longest render time of anything they did. And I was like, why was that so
Really?
long? And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. It's Moadib. That's what the mouse is. So part 2 importance. But I didn't realize that. Yeah, foreshadowing. I didn't realize what.
Yeah, that's right. They explain what Moadib translates from.
Right. The little mouse. I already mentioned that. Oh yeah, and then just like imperfections. That's a big thing that Greg Fraser is all about. You see that a lot in the Batman too, where it's just like this concept of dirtying up the frame, where you could frame everything so it's just like, you know, this perfect picturesque thing, but instead we're going to have this other little element in there, and it makes it feel more alive and
exactly.
Yeah, I can't.
The perfect shot actually breaks the illusion a little bit.
Yeah, it makes it distances you a little bit. It makes it feel a little bit more like it's artificial. Like it reminds you what you're watching a movie, which is nothing wrong with being able to appreciate, oh, that's a really beautiful shot. But like if it's too perfect, yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah, it's like when your parents go away for the weekend and you're a teenager. If you clean up the house too good, they know you were up to, but you have to make it a little messy here and there, and then it looks, lived in.
That's a very funny comparison. The other ones, I don't know if these are things that other people find interesting at all. This is the stuff that gets me excited, but the camera movements, I noticed they were all very invisible. I only noticed them because I was looking for them. So there's a lot of something that I really appreciate in epics. I've noticed this is the same. I watched Fellowship of the Ring with a director's eye recently. They do the same thing there. There's some other movies that I love that do this, where it's just like all these very slow pushes or these slow trucks, or pans where you're just like, yeah, there's motivated movement that's not just there for eye candy. This is a horrible phrase I've heard some people recommend. Oh, you got to make sure that the camera's moving so that you have eye candy. It's like, no.
That's directorial intrusion.
It's obnoxious. And maybe that's true for certain types of movies. Like if you're making a Transformer movie, okay, maybe that's what people expect. But when you're making an epic, the camera needs to move, like it has to be all very motivated. It needs to be moving with the camera, with the characters, or like these very slow push-ins and stuff. Like they're so effective, and they keep it, because if it's just still, you might feel a little bit restless. But these very slow movements keeps it alive, and it has that sort of, I don't know, little sense of anticipation, and I don't know what the right word.
It creates tension a little bit.
Yeah,
too,
tension. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because it feels like you're moving up on something.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost like I think Dune has a little bit of like a voyeuristic sense at times, where like you're moving into spaces, you're looking around, and you're seeing things, and you don't know what's around the corner. So you're probably right. Those slow moving cameras give you a sense of like of seeing things you're not supposed to see, maybe.
Yes. I don't know. I think when in the context of epics, it's just it's the same thing as like when you have a long shot, but having a very slowly moving shot, it gives the sense of it's adding to that feeling of scale and yeah, and you're like, we're taking our time. We're not going to rush to tell you the answer. We're not going to rush to show.
Oh, that's a good observation. We're taking our time. We're settling in.
Yes. I think that's what I'm looking for.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I think those are most. Oh wait, no, I had some more. Those were like the directing notes. Just some very superficial things about it that I just really fun. It's just so cool.
They're not. That's not, I think not superficial. I think nuanced is what you mean.
Well, what I'm about to say is superficial. Everything I said before is not superficial, but
okay.
Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave the superficial ones. I'll keep those to myself.
Let's hear them. You're on a roll. Let's go.
Jesus now.
Okay, well, there's things like just like, I don't know what it is about this. I wonder if you guys feel the same way. When there's some sort of an epic story, Lord of the Rings does the heck out of this. When you just have like flowy fabric in the wind, why does that make me feel something? You have a character that's just standing there and they're just I love the moment with what's her name?
Does that work?
Eowyn, when we first meet her, and there's like the
flag goes
the
up
flag
into the
and her hair and like the the dress and everything. There's something about that is also really epic, and I've never been able to figure out why it is. But this movie does that a lot, like with the Bene Gesserit when they're first walking in, and just there's this intense wind, and there's you have it a lot with feminine characters, but you have it with masculine characters too, like a big nice cape or cloak. It's just there's a whole bunch of Paul doing this. Like, why is that so cool? Can someone explain that to me? Like, it just
got my wheels turning.
It makes my heart sing. I don't know. It feels like one of the things that's important in an epic. I don't know why.
Is it because there's like an image of like perfection, and then the weather is what like skews that perfection a little bit or something?
It feels powerful to me. I don't know why, but when a character is standing there with cloaks going in the wind, it feels powerful. If you have an army and their banners are flapping in the wind, something about that feels powerful.
The elemental reality interacting with the pageantry, maybe.
And it's cool. That's what I think.
There's a cultural pageantry, and then you've got the imperfection of weather interacting with it. So I wonder if there is some sort of formula there or a little equation that makes.
Maybe I don't want to intellectualize it. Maybe I just want to acknowledge that it makes me feel something. I don't know.
Well, I was trying to figure out why, but I got you.
I want to figure out why. If you think of something, do tell me. I guess the last big thing to talk about is, of course, the soundtrack. So did you know that it was also Hans Zimmer? Of course, it's Hans Zimmer. Of course, it is. It was also he had a dream of doing soundtrack for Dune one day.
Yes.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
But like that was also his.
He insisted on the soundtrack.
And he was really very like part of the reason why it sounds so unique is because he didn't use existing instruments. He went and created his own instruments because he was like, this is 10,000 years in the future. So it's like, so they wouldn't be using any of the instruments we use today. So he went and like created instruments to use for this, with the one exception, which is the bagpipes, but that was Denis' idea.
But he even camouflages the bagpipes with like an electric guitar sound. There's like this. So
I have a guy with bagpipes. No, I thought the bagpipe was there because there's a guy who's carrying bagpipes.
Well, that was probably the filmmaker adding that in to match the soundtrack.
Yeah, that's the opposite. So
really?
Hans didn't want to have any
recognizable
any instrument, but Denis wanted there to be some other element to when House Atreides arrives on
when House Atreides arrives, House Atreides plays bagpipes,
right? And so he describes it as this like idea in the middle of the night. He's like, oh, they should have bagpipes, and I think he kind of had to convince Hans Zimmer to
well, I'll tell you. So I bought the Mondo Dune sketchbook. I freaking love this soundtrack, and the first time I heard people talking about the soundtrack before I knew anything about it, they were bashing it. Like, this is the worst soundtrack ever. And then I listened to it and I was like, oh my God, why do I like this terrible soundtrack so much? They were wrong. And I knew that Hans Zimmer was going to win an Academy Award because the music had such texture and unique sound to it.
Yeah.
Those rapid industrial drums that he bashes on, that bagpipe sound. And believe it or not, that's like a House Atreides national anthem sound that he's trying to create. This ultimate cultural moment of pure pageantry with the culture marching out in this formal setting, this ceremonial perfection. Everyone's in formation to observe the arrival of House Atreides. I love it. And so that's the national anthem sound for House Atreides. When the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar attack Dune in their surprise attack, and Gurney, Josh Brolin's character, Gurney Halleck realizes that they're under attack, and he's like, everyone, go to that. You hear in the soundtrack, you hear the House Atreides national anthem blast in the background as they all scramble for their and they don't make it, but I love the soundtrack. Sorry, Brianna, I completely hijacked that. I didn't mean to. I just love the soundtrack.
Yeah, it's Hans Zimmer often his music is so like it touches on such primal feelings, and I feel that this movie was one of the best examples of that. A couple note things, like specific things about that I noticed. There's of course the drum beats. There's something about a certain kind of drum beat that we all just like brings out our inner hunter gatherer. We want to be around a fire and beat the drums and dance to it. It's just the most like basic human feel. Like we all just have this feeling that's like it harkens back to something that's primal. I don't want to overuse that word, but and then there's a sort of like clacking sound. I don't know how to describe it. That's like in the soundtrack that kind of like evokes a feeling of like the like West Asia, North Africa deserts kind of a feel, even though it's not an actual instrument from that era. It feels like it's from that part of our world. So it's the perfect association for Arrakis. It just gives all the right associations while still being fresh and new. And then one other note, this is actually not about soundtrack, but it is about sound. So any people who've watched behind the scenes stuff will know this, but the sound of that, what do you call it? The thing that sort of pounds the sand to draw the sandworms. What is it?
Thumper, right?
Thumper. Thank you. So that there's something about that it's so unique the way it sounds. And the reason why it sounds the way it does is because to get that sound, using the word sound a lot, the sound designers, the people that were recording it, they literally put microphones deep down into sand. And then from up above, they made that pounding. So they were recording that from underground.
That's a subterranean thumping.
Yeah, and so that's why it sounds the way it does. It's very unique. They were recording it from within sand.
So you're hearing it the way the sandworms hear it.
Exactly. Yeah. So
wow.
Anyway, those are all my things that I love from a filmmaking perspective.
And by the way, the soundtrack also has several different vocalizations that are all very. There's a feminine sound. There's almost there's a feminine whispering that's almost incoherent, and it's spooky because it's loud on the soundtrack. It's not like in the background. It's like
they created their own language for that, by the way.
I figured. I didn't even know that for sure, but I believe it instantly. And then of course you've got the deep these rhythmic, almost like aums in there. And when you play the record, like sometimes I'll play it in here, I'll close my doors in my office and I'm listening to the Dune music. You are transported by that soundtrack.
Right.
It instantly changes the tone of the space you're in. It's amazing.
Yes. I want to watch.
That's right. I geek out over soundtracks.
All right. Well, this is cool. So next Tuesday, a week from tonight, we will see what is up with Dune 2, Dune Part 2.
Yeah, I wish we all lived near. We can all go to. I wish we could go at the same time.
I know that would be really neat. That would be neat.
What Heath and I need to do is we need to come and visit you, Doug.
Yeah, I would love it. I would treat you guys like I would be like the guard or the ward of the change, the judge of the change. I would allow. We'd have a ceremonial introduction.
I mean, I would love for you guys to visit me too. Heath's been talking about it forever, and he never does it. So I've just kind of given up at this point.
Yeah, I know.
I'm messing with you, but I also want to go. I'm forgetting the name of your city. That's fun. What's your name of your city again?
Who?
Doug?
Austin.
Austin. I've been meaning to visit Austin for a while. So
yeah, if you guys ever came to Austin, I would be absolutely delighted to be an ambassador to the city and welcome you in and show you around. And plus, it would just be great to meet you guys. So
one of these days,
fully welcome in Austin.
Awesome.
So yeah, we're going Thursday. When are you seeing it, Brianna?
Saturday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time.
And Heath, when are you going to see it?
I hadn't completely decided yet. I was just looking at times today, and I thought maybe early on Friday. I could go
early on Friday. So by Saturday night, I could text you guys, and I would find out what you guys thought.
Yeah, hopefully at 7. I would be finishing the movie. I'd be coming home like 10 or 11 my time. So
yeah, it's long too, isn't it?
It might be a little
long, but from what I've heard, it doesn't feel long. It goes quick. because of the improvements to pacing for part 2, apparently. And by the way, I don't mind the slower pace in part 1, but I heard that it's just not an issue in part 2.
2 hours 46 minutes, so it's longer. It is longer as far as general minutes go.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind either, even though
that's why I was thinking earlier on Friday for me.
I should give a random anecdote before you wrap up. When I went to go rewatch part 1 in the theaters, because they had it back in the theaters for a week. I live in a pretty dry state in Colorado. It's like you notice I'm having this massive water bottle. You just kind of have to keep drinking. If you don't, if I wasn't drinking water the whole time I'm talking to you guys, I would be dehydrated by the end. Like, it's so fast.
Yeah, Colorado or Denver. Yeah.
It's insane. But I forgot I was driving, and it was like towards the end of the week when Dune was available, so there weren't as many showings, and I had to drive like 30 minutes to get to a theater. And I realized halfway through my drive, I go to reach for my water bottle, and I realized I left it at home. I was like, oh no. I don't have water. How am I going to survive 3 hours? And so when I got there, I was a little bit late and meeting there with my friend. And I was like, I've seen this movie before, so I'm going to, sometime during the movie, I'm going to go and get some drinks for us, because I know I'm going to be thirsty. There was never a point when I could make myself tear my eyes off of the screen, even though I'd already seen the movie. So I just got dehydrated because it was.
So that was your version of being at Arrakis, and you didn't have your still suit.
Yes, something like that. I need one of those over here.
Well, we appreciate the gift of your moisture. You didn't have any.
That makes me thirsty just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's funny watching Dune. Always makes me really crave clear water in a glass. That scene in the breakfast table when she gives him the water.
Yeah.
It always makes me crave water. That one scene.
You mean you don't crave recycled warm water that's taken from your sweat and tears in your still suit? That's not what you crave?
Not usually, but I'll be open to it in the future.
Okay.
All right, so everybody, finish reading Dune. If you haven't finished reading it and go see the next movie. So we got Dune coming up, and then Alien after that, and then not I don't think the week after that, but soon after that, next month we've got Paradise Lost. So get into Paradise Lost. So that's coming up. So there's stuff to read.
Yeah, some homework.
Yeah, this is basically becoming a book club at this point.
Yeah, it kind of is. There were flash movies that stacked up, but we're actually finally moving through some of them, which is fantastic.
Which was great. Yes, go us.
We've actually tackled a bunch.
So, is there anything else, or is that it? So
I'm good.
That's great. That's perfect. We left right off where we're supposed to, and Dune Part 2 comes out in the next 2 days.
So everybody, we'll see you back here 7:00 next Tuesday, 7:00 p.m. Central Time for Dune Part 2. Thank you all so much, everybody.
All right.
Later.